So as most of you know, I'm your town moderator, Bob Hiss. Welcome to this special winter town meeting. Having been advised by our town clerk, Susan Galvin, that a majority of town meeting members are in attendance, I hereby declare that a quorum is present for the transaction of business, and this meeting is now open. In keeping with our longstanding tradition, we'll start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Will the members join me at home? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Since our last meeting in December of 2020, I'm sad to report that we have lost one town meeting member. Please join me in a moment of silence for Bob Sheffield, a town meeting member since 1975, total of 46 years. Thank you very much, and thank you to Mr. Sheffield and his family for their longstanding service to our town. Before proceeding with the business of the meeting, however, there are certain preliminary matters to be taken up. First, permission has been requested for certain members and personnel of the Fire Station Building Committee and other departments who are not town meeting members to attend this meeting with other members of their respective boards, committees, and departments, upon the understanding, of course, that they will not vote. Hearing no objection from the body in the Zoom chat window, such permission will be and hereby is accorded. Second, permission is granted to Milton Cablevision to televise these proceedings. And third, unless a member raises an objection now in the Zoom chat window, we'll continue to use the rules for the conduct of our annual town meeting in June 2020 as the rules for this meeting. I see no objections. I will remind members of two other rules that pertain to this meeting. By long-standing tradition, while any other registered voter of the town who is not a town meeting member may not vote here at town meeting, he or she may be recognized to address town meeting, providing that the voter in advance of the particular session has obtained permission from the moderator. Note, we have one registered voter who has sought and been granted permission to speak for this meeting. And lastly, in this meeting, there is one article that will require a 2/3 vote. So now I will proceed in tonight's winter session to read a motion to authorize this special town meeting to proceed as a remote town meeting. Move that the town of Milton conduct its 2021 special town meeting as a remote town meeting using the Zoom webinar technology as recommended by the town moderator and approved by the select board on Wednesday, January 13, 2021. Further, during the special 2021 remote town meeting, only the following rules will be modified to conform with the limitations of the Zoom webinar technology. Rule 1 is replaced in its entirety by the following. First, town meeting members are required to register for town meeting with the town clerk and join town meeting via a computing device by clicking on the town meeting link emailed to them in advance. The town clerk will confirm their registration as they are admitted to the remote town meeting. Town citizens and others who are not town meeting members will only be admitted to the remote town meeting with the prior permission of the moderator. Rule 2 is modified as follows. Second, any town meeting member wishing to speak to any article or pending related matter will first click the raise hand button, and upon being recognized by the moderator will identify herself or himself by giving his or her name and precinct. If you have not been recognized by the moderator, you are not permitted to speak to the meeting. On occasion, members will informally alert the moderator that they desire to be recognized to speak on a certain article. While your moderator will attempt to remember who desires to be recognized on any article, please be advised that the only way in which a member can be sure to be recognized is to click the raise hand button in the Zoom webinar and wait to be recognized. Rule 11 is modified as follows. 11th, upon a question being put to the town meeting, the moderator will first determine by electronic vote the sense of the meeting. The moderator will display and announce the results of the electronic vote. If the vote is doubted by 25 town meeting members clicking the raise hand button, then there will be a roll call of the meeting with the town clerk calling the name of each town meeting member in alphabetical order, and each town meeting member, upon his or her name being called, shall unmute their microphone and answer yes or no. I'll now entertain a motion in the Zoom chat window to accept this motion. I see Mr. Fundling has so moved. If I have a second in the chat window. Mr. Wall seconds. This motion is debatable. Does anyone wish to speak to this meeting? If so, please raise your hand in the, click the raise hand button. And I see Mr. Pariser, if I'm pronouncing it right, your hand's been raised for a few minutes. Do you wish to speak to this article? If you could unmute yourself. Sorry, not to this article, but to this motion. Is Mr. Pariser unmuted? I'll take it by his silence that no one wishes to speak to this motion. With that, can we put up the polling question? All those in favor of motion to conduct Milton's 2021 special town meeting as a virtual meeting, please signify by voting yes. All those opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. I'll give it 5 more seconds. Okay, we can close the poll. The vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to have a few speakers with us tonight. I'd first like to recognize Ms. Carolyn Kinsella of the Health Department, who has asked for a few minutes to update you about their important work. Ms. Kinsella. Do we see Caroline in the room? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Hello, everyone. I'm Caroline Kinsella, the Milton Health Director and Precinct 8 Town Meeting Member. I'd just like to give you a short COVID-19 update for the town of Milton. Since our first confirmed case on March 1st, 2020, Milton has had 1,979 cumulative confirmed cases of COVID-19. Within the last 5 weeks, Milton has seen a decrease in confirmed COVID-19 cases that has moved our town into the yellow zone with a percent positivity last week of 2.19%. So that's great news. I'm seeing less than 10 cases now a week. As directed by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and the Milton Health Department, started vaccinating phase 1, police, fire, and EMS, and phase 2, step 1, residents over 75 years of age on January 12th, setting up vaccination clinics twice a week at the Council on Aging. The Council on Aging, in collaboration with the Health Department, reached out to Milton residents over the age of 75 to personally register them for vaccines. The Health Department, with the assistance of other town department staff and EMTs from the Milton Fire Department, have given 470 Moderna vaccines, the doses thus far, which include homebound residents. And I want to thank the town staff for helping the Health Department. The Massachusetts Department of Public Health has allocated only 100 doses of Moderna vaccine per week to Milton. On February 18th, Governor Baker announced that individuals 65 or older, individuals with 2 or more specific medical conditions, and staff and residents of public and private, low-income and affordable senior housing are eligible now to receive the vaccine. Effective March 1st, the state will no longer provide first dose vaccines to the Milton Health Department. That's disappointing. We will continue to close the loop, ensuring that residents who did receive the first vaccine at the Milton Council on Aging, they will be able to receive the second dose at the Milton Council on Aging. I'm currently working with 8 other local health departments to procure the vaccine regionally and continue to have clinics at the Council on Aging locally, but I'm still waiting on an answer from the state. The governor is encouraging residents to receive the vaccine at mass vaccination sites such as Gillette and Fenway, and seek pharmacies and retail locations administering the doses, which currently are numbered at 105 locations statewide. The Department of Public Health has identified 20 municipalities that have the greatest COVID burden and have the greatest percentage of non-white residents to ensure equitable distribution, and are prioritizing administering the vaccine in these communities. Residents may call 211 to assist them in the process of registering for a vaccine at mass vaccination sites. Please go to the Town of Milton website, and under the red ribbon, I post updates on vaccine distribution every week. And Boston University Public Health is posting cumulative reports of Milton COVID-19 cases by age, race, sex, and ethnicity. I encourage everyone to please continue to wear masks to slow the spread of the virus transmission, wash your hands often, and social distance. And that's my report from Milton. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, by the way, I'd like to thank Ms. Kinsella and the entire department for the heavy lift they've been putting in on all of our behalfs. And I think everyone would join me in that sentiment. Next, I'd like to recognize Congressman Stephen Lynch, who will give us a brief update on all things happening at the federal level. Congressman Lynch, you are recognized. Congressman, are you there? Okay, perhaps he's slightly delayed. Never fear, we have other elected officials waiting, queued up like planes landing at Logan. So next I'll go to Senator Walter Timilty. Senator Timilty, you are recognized. You're on mute, Senator. There you go.
Moderator.
Gotcha.
Good evening. Good evening to my fellow citizens of the town. Walter Timilty, Precinct 8. And it, of course, is my privilege to represent this great town in the state Senate. And I thank you very much for that privilege to each and every citizen of the town. Briefly, just quick update. The Senate President on Friday, February 12th, saw fit to appoint me as the chairperson of the Joint Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. The Senate President also saw fit to appoint me as the Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. Also, the Senate President saw fit to appoint me to the Joint Committee on Revenue, Joint Committee on State Administration and Regulatory Oversight, and the Joint Committee on Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development. So I thank the citizens of this great town and throughout my district for this privilege. Cutting right away to the most important issue that we all face as a country and as citizens of the Commonwealth, the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Mrs. Kinsella and her team for the wonderful work they are doing to protect each and every one of us in this town. Recently, and Mrs. Kinsella alluded to this quite ably so, Governor Baker's decision, which took away resources and the ability to administer vaccines, and of course the authority at the local level, I believe is incredibly wrong-headed, a terrible decision. And as a result of that, in collaboration with the Mass Fire Chiefs Association, I authored a letter which today I dispatched to Secretary of Health and Human Services, Mary Lou Sutters, with 50 colleagues from the House of Representatives and the State Senate, urging the governor and the Baker administration to reverse what I believe, again, is a wrong-headed policy, and that's putting it mildly. Our professionals at the local level, our professionals at boards of health, like Mrs. Kinsella, our first responders have trained for years to administer vaccinations to protect our citizenry. The infrastructure is in place. The professionals that we have here in this town are A+, and throughout the Commonwealth, ready to do this. And of course, we have A+ first responders in both police and fire. To be succinct, the people and personnel are ready to go. Mrs. Kinsella and her wonderful team and our first responders have demonstrated that in the past and recently in administering this vaccine. So this letter, which is posted on each and every one of my social media platforms, was sent today again and signed on by 50 of my colleagues in the House and Senate, urging the Baker administration to reverse this policy and once again empower our cities and towns to administer these vaccines. With that, I quickly will give you a legislative update. Bill filing period ended on February 19th. I have filed once again, a robust legislative package, and I'll just give you a quick snapshot of this legislative package, which I'll be proud to advocate and push in this 2-year session, which we just embarked upon. Senate Docket 770, which is an act relative to requiring notification of hazardous utility work to local regional emergency departments, specifically police and fire. Senate Docket 773, an act relative to ambulance service reimbursements, which will be a great financial assistance to our community and every community in the Commonwealth regarding reimbursement for ambulance rates. I included that in the Senate bill that I was very proud to vote for back in June regarding telehealth to modernize the delivery of medical services here in the Commonwealth. It was successfully adopted. It did not survive conference committee, so I have filed it using the two-year legislative session as the vehicle, but I believe it's very important financially for communities across the Commonwealth regarding ambulance reimbursement rates and insurance companies. Moreover, Senate Docket 778, an act establishing a special commission to study and recommend improvements in the delivery of prescription drug benefits to the senior citizens of the Commonwealth and each and every citizen for that matter. Senate Docket 784, an act to require the Department of Public Health to conduct a study of the health impacts of airplane flights on the resident communities that are represented on the Massport CAC. This is a legislative proposal that I have successfully adopted in Senate budgets in years past by way of an amendment, and it has not survived conference committee. What I am attempting to do is through the legislative process to codify this and make this into law, obviously for the Commonwealth, to obviously expose what is a horrible next-gen aviation system that has been foisted upon us by the FAA and the deleterious health effects that each and every citizen within the flight paths that are imposed upon us by the FAA, what the ramifications are. I believe the study, if it will be allowed to take place by the Commonwealth, the results will be sobering. Also, an act, Senate Docket 781, an act relative to the safety of fire, police, and emergency medical technicians from contagious diseases. And Senate Docket 787, an act relative to furthering the success of opiate intervention programs. It's been my privilege in the 4 years that I've represented this town and the Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth Senate District as a whole to work with the 9 substance use disorder coalitions. They are all outstanding. Mrs. Kinsella and Dr. Stillman do wonderful work here in the community of Milton. Each year, I file an amendment to the Senate budget seeking to obtain monies as much as $25,000 in certain years. This year was $11,000 per coalition, given to the streamlined budget that we enacted in the state legislature. But this is a further way to work with substance use disorder coalitions and to help each and every family and individual in the Commonwealth that suffers from substance use disorder. With that, I thank you very much. And just in closing, add that I've also filed Senate Docket 683, an act relative to PPE data transparency, and Senate Docket 1053, a resolve relative to the establishment of a joint oversight committee on personal protective equipment. And that's just a snapshot of my legislative package. I thank you all very much. Please, if anybody needs any assistance regarding unemployment assistance, food insecurity, my staff and my team and myself stand ready, able to assist and work for the citizens of this town. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you to the town meeting.
Senator Timilty, you're welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight. Next, I'd like to recognize Representative Bill Driscoll, who's sent in a message for us. Zoom host, should we play his message?
Hello, Mr. Moderator. Good evening to our town meeting members, and thank you all for allowing me a few moments to speak tonight. Good evening to our town administrator, our town clerk, our select board members, members of the various committees that have done a lot of work to get us here to this special town meeting, other elected officials in attendance. Thank you for what you do. A special thanks to our school committee members and our new superintendent, Mr. Jett. I know that educating in a pandemic has immense challenges, and I've appreciated our conversations on how we can best help to educate in our schools and in our community going forward. I wanted to provide a little bit of a legislative update and some updates from the State House, in particular on the vaccine rollout moving forward. So first and foremost, we recently passed a climate change roadmap for the state that looks at dates between now and 2050 and makes sure that the administration, the governor's administration, is held accountable in terms of getting our reliance on fossil fuels reduced, and that we have some dates to aim at as we go forward in that process. I've actually filed some separate legislation that you'll probably hear me talking about in various places in the future that helps to support those goals and make sure that we can achieve them as time goes on. In the election laws department, I was the vice chair last session, and we supported the town. Thanks again to our clerk and the clerk staff for pulling off elections amid a pandemic. You can likely see in this new session that we'll probably codify to some degree the access to expanded early voting and mail-in voting. Generally, that was seen as a big success in terms of voter turnout. So those conversations are happening. I've talked to the outgoing chair and the new chair of the Election Laws Committee for the House just in the last couple of days about that. And we'll do whatever we need to in terms of supporting additional town meetings or municipal elections during this public health emergency. On the front of liaising with state agencies, my office is always open to anyone that needs it, whether it be help expediting an unemployment claim or talking to another state agency. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me in my office, and we will do anything that we can to support you. Finally, in this new session, I've been appointed chairman of a newly formed committee called COVID-19 and Emergency Preparedness and Management. And this Thursday at 2:25, we'll be talking with the governor and other members of the administration about the vaccine rollout in particular. This is the first in a series of hearings to look at the vaccine rollout and explore seemingly why the state was so underprepared for the rollout, where we are today, what needs to be addressed so that things are more easily accessible, and that this process can be more predictable for folks, and that the months ahead when we have to vaccinate millions more, we want to make sure that the governor and his administration are held to account that that process is going to go a lot smoother than it has in recent days. So again, thank you all for your service to our town. I appreciate everything you're doing, and I appreciate the time to talk to you tonight. Good luck with the special town meeting. Thanks again.
Thank you, Rep. Driscoll. Right now, Ms. Galvin, our town clerk, needs to identify a couple phone callers. Ms. Galvin?
Hi, person with the phone number ending in 647, please identify yourself. Can hit *6 to unmute.
Frank Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Desmond. And if the person with the phone number ending in 980, could you please identify yourself? Again, *6 will unmute you.
Kathy Cassis of the Warrant Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galvin. Now let's proceed to Article 1, which you will find on page 10 in your warrant. Now, this is a particularly lengthy article, and unless I see an objection in the Zoom chat window, I'm going to waive the reading of this article and assume it was read in as our main motion. And I see there is no objection. Thank you, Ms. Agostino. With that, two things. I'm first going to recognize Chair of the Select Board, Melinda Collins, who would like to just introduce this article. Also, I wanted to thank one of the members who was kind enough to send in writing, prior to last Friday's deadline, a proposed amendment. We'll be able to have that individual read it to you, explain it, and we'll put it up on the screen so you can all see the proposal. Ms. Collins, at this point, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. And good evening, fellow town meeting members. And thank you, members of the warrant committee and all those who have helped put this town meeting together. We had a momentous occasion when the CPA, the Community Preservation Act, was passed. And I thought that it may be a good idea to explain a couple of things based on questions that the board received over the weekend before we get to the article itself, which establishes the Community Preservation Committee and is per statute part of the process to get this committee up and running. So one question had to do with how matching funds are awarded. And those matching funds are based on the amount the town has raised from the surcharge on the property tax and any other funds that are raised for the CPA. There are other ways that you can raise money for CPA. People could donate to the CPA fund for instance. So it's not all the money that's collected by the state through the registry. It's the surcharge that dictates that. So that's clarification number one. The second clarification is about what the committee does, and specifically around estimates that it receives for grants. So the body that suggests a project will need to also submit an estimate for that project. And it's up to the members of the committee to decide what the parameters of the estimates should be. The detail that's needed and the amount of background. So that all needs to be defined by the committee. And then it will vet those estimates. And that's what's passed on in the recommendation to town meeting. So they vet it, then it goes to the warrant committee. The warrant committee vets it again and makes its recommendation. And that recommendation is then given to town meeting. So town meeting has approval power or the power of veto, rather than the ability to substitute projects or to change details of particular projects. So I just thought that it was important to help people understand a bit about the work that the committee will do, and then town meeting's important role. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Get my camera back on. Let me just see if we have anyone who would like to speak to this motion. I see Mr. Callahan, you are recognized. And Warrant Committee Clerk, could we put up the motion to amend, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Tom Callahan. I'm Precinct 4 town meeting member. Wearing that hat tonight, but I just for full disclosure, I'm also a member of the Affordable Housing Trust, the Milton Affordable Housing Trust, a member of the Housing Committee, as well as I wear a statewide hat as chair of the steering committee of the nonprofit Community Preservation Coalition, which works on the statewide level to increase the size of the state match for Community Preservation Act communities, and helps communities all around the state who are considering adopting it, helps them try to make that decision and supports their efforts towards adoption. So just full disclosure, that's a few of the hats I'm wearing. But tonight I'm speaking as a Precinct 4 town meeting member. First, I want to thank the Select Board for the prompt drafting of this article and moving this forward to establish this very important Community Preservation Committee. And I wanted to take a moment to remind town meeting members, many of you are probably aware, but some of you may not be, that the town does have something called the Milton Affordable Housing Trust. It was established several years ago by the Select Board. And while it hasn't had significant resources, largely because our town hadn't yet adopted the Community Preservation Act, the trust has been active and has continued to meet regularly over the last few years. When I say the trust, I should give credit to Katie Conlon, Phil Murphy, Frank Davis, and our chair, Julie Kramer, for their service on the trusts over the last several years. The trust has just recently been instrumental in getting 2 affordable condominiums sold by lottery at 199 Church Street in East Milton. That was as a result of a Pulte Town Farm sale, and they were required to provide 2 affordable units. We're currently working with the developer of Walcott Woods to site 6 additional affordable units around town as a result of the requirement, the inclusionary zoning requirement from the Walcott Woods development. So we've been active and continue to try to sort of promote affordable housing, new affordable housing in town. We are certainly, as trust members, I'm certainly looking forward to the resources provided by the CPA, and we wanted to thank the town for their overwhelming support at the ballot box. This amendment I'm proposing tonight, does one simple thing. It adds there was 9 members of the Community Preservation Committee, and it adds a 6th designated seat. There's 5 that are called out in the statute: the Historical Commission, the Planning Board, Parks Commission, Housing Authority, and Conservation Commission. And this would change those 5 designated seats to a 6th designated seat, adding the Affordable Housing Trust as the 6th. So that's the first sentence in red that you see on the screen. And then in the paragraph below that, normally, if there were only 5 designated seats, there would be 4 what we consider at-large seats appointed by the select board. So that would just change to 3 members appointed by the select board. And you can see the proposed changes there, dropping down from 2 to 1 member appointed for initial term of 2 years. And then we add trust into that list, the commission board or trust in the last paragraph of section 1. And then I think there's one more change further down where we add the Affordable Housing Trust into the list of boards to be consulted as the Community Preservation Committee does the needs assessment that it's required by statute to do. So that is the change. Just one comment I would say, people have asked me a very good question of the Housing Authority is already by statute on the Community Preservation Committee. Why do you need an Affordable Housing Trust? And the way I would answer that is the Housing Authority in Milton, as people know, does a really good job of stewarding our existing affordable housing resources, the 39 units at Miller Ave, the 12 scattered site units, the almost 200 vouchers that they manage. But the Affordable Housing Trust's charge is specifically to support new affordable housing development and be an effective broker for new housing resources. And so we think it's an appropriate addition to add the affordable housing, representative of the Affordable Housing Trust to the Community Preservation Committee. So I would propose that motion, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Callahan, in your note to me, you indicated you'd like to propose this as a friendly amendment. Is that still your intention?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, as a friendly amendment, this was submitted by the select board. I'd like to check in with the select board. Ms. Collins, what's your opinion of the friendly amendment? And then I'll go to the warrant committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I do also want to thank Richard Wells, who has served on the Affordable Housing Trust The select board voted in its meeting just prior to this unanimously to support this amendment, recognizing the different charge that the Affordable Housing Trust has, and the mission of that body being so important to our town. Looking at how many people are cost burdened, 30% of Milton residents are cost burdened, for housing. And we have been underfunded in our housing trust because we haven't had CPA. And this is a unique opportunity to make sure that we do the very best we can on this issue. Just to remind people, 10% of the money in the CPA fund goes towards housing, 10% goes toward outdoor, and recreation, and then 10% towards historic preservation. So it's recognized, and I think this is fully warranted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. I'd next like to recognize George Asher, the chair of the Warrant Committee. Mr. Asher.
Mr. Moderator, the Warrant Committee assents to the amendment unanimously.
Very good, thank you. So the friendly amendment has been accepted as displayed on your screen. With that, I see some other hands raised to speak to this motion. I'll recognize Mr. Leroy Walker. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I actually had a question on the main motion, but the question went directly to what Mr. Callahan has proposed as an amendment. So I am in full support of this amendment, and I'm hopeful that with that addition as well, the committee going forward will be able to help us proactively manage the affordable housing question, which is an important one for the town. And I think that some oversight would be particularly helpful at this juncture. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Matthews and Mr. Kelly. Mr. Matthews, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is Scott Matthews, Precinct 10, Town Meeting Member. I support the changes. I just want to make one comment that it looks like there's one change that is missing in the fourth paragraph of that section 1, where the last part of the sentence was modified to add trust. The first part of the sentence also has the same wording and looks like it needs trust inserted in there as well.
I'm reading along. That is a good point. Perhaps I'll go back to, so would you like to propose that as a friendly amendment to this article since you're speaking on it right now?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Mr. Callahan to be, by the way, do you want to say anything else to this, Mr. Matthews, at this point, speak to this article?
No, I do not. I actually had an amendment I was going to make, but Mr. Callahan's amendment made mine moot, so we can move on.
Very good. Mr. Callahan, you're recognized again. What say you to this?
I would thank Scott for catching my mistake. Yes, I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Very good. Select Board, are you in favor of the friendly? Ms. Collins?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, thank you. We are.
Thank you. Mr. Asher, the Warrant Committee?
I'll just take the poll of the committee just for form's sake.
Thank you.
Committee, what do we think here? Do we have any, is there any objection? Mr. Moderator, George Asher, Chair, Warrant Committee, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6, Warrant Committee assents to the change.
Very good, thank you. So the motion has been amended now to insert the word trust in the last paragraph of section 1 after the word board. Thank you. Mr. Callahan and Matthews, if you could lower your hands. Next, I see Mr. Kelly. You're recognized, and that's the last person that wishes to speak.
Yes, I just have a general question. If this amendment is approved, will the trust have to abstain when voting on affordable housing related projects?
Good question. So you're a little faint, so I'll say it out loud. The question is, will the Affordable Housing Trust have to abstain when it is voting on affordable housing related projects? We get that right?
Yes.
Thank you. I think I will go to the select board or town council for that question to see if that's a legal question or is that a intention question by for Mr. Callahan.
Well, Mr. Moderator, Melinda Collins, Chair of the Select Board, I'm not quite clear. It sounds like a legal question to me, but in what context are we talking about the Affordable Housing Trust voting on affordable housing projects? Because many different bodies have roles in any project that would come through the town. I mean, there could be the ZBA, there could, it's difficult. Are we talking about if the Affordable Housing Trust is working on a project to bring it to someone? So it sounds like a legal question to me, but I'm still not clear on the context.
Mr. Kelly, could you elaborate on your question?
Yes, I was just talking about when they vote to move something forward to be approved by town meeting or by the warrant committee, then town meeting. If they're voting on a project that there's a group that wants money that is for affordable housing, do they get to vote on that or do they have to abstain?
As a member of the Community Preservation Act Committee, you mean?
Yes, sir.
I'll ask town council for their opinion or just on this. I have my point of view, but Mr. Freitag, you there?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Moderator. I think that the best answer I can give is that it depends. It would depend on the exact vote that was being taken. And I think it would also need to be determined whether or not, if any conflict did exist, whether there could be a certain disclosure that could be filed in advance of the vote that would disclose any potential conflict and address any potential concern. So it would be pretty fact specific, I think, and circumstance specific.
Thank you. With that, the next speaker, Mr. Callahan, maybe I'll recognize you. Perhaps you might be able to also answer this since you did propose this. We recognize Mr. Callahan.
Yeah, I am. First, I would say I'm not an attorney, and Mr. Freitag's comments probably sort of outweigh this, but I would think based on my understanding around the state with other community preservation committees when this situation has occurred, I wouldn't think the member of the Affordable Housing Trust, the representative of the Affordable Housing Trust, would have to abstain on any sort of affordable housing proposal. I think that would be counterproductive, but there is a chance the Affordable Housing Trust could be the recipient of Community Preservation Act funds directly. And that probably, in my opinion, non-legal opinion, might make sense for the trust member to abstain from those votes. But there's as Selectwoman Collins said, there's just a number of potential proposals from direct funding of a project to funding it through the trust. And I think it would depend on how that was proposed. The one thing, while I have the floor, the friendly amendment to the friendly amendment that added the trust in that fourth paragraph of the first section, it now needs a comma after the word trust. Great.
Understood.
Thank you.
I think the clerk would recognize the grammatical intent of inserting the comma. So we'll assume that was implied by the friendly amendment. With that, Mr. Kelly, I see your hand is still up. Did you have a follow-up to that question?
No, sir.
Okay. Ms. O'Donnell, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, I just wanted to address the question posed by Mr. Kelly. In full disclosure, I have served on the Community Preservation Coalition with Mr. Callahan. I also represent a number of affordable housing trusts throughout the Commonwealth. And I would just say that as our town council mentioned, it is fact specific. For the most part, the Affordable Housing Trust would participate in any discussions of affordable housing in the town of Milton, but would, as Mr. Callahan pointed out, have to step out of the room when and if the Affordable Housing Trust put in an application for community preservation funds for a project that it was going to be handling.
Thank you. Sounds consistent with our own town council. Very good. Mr. Callahan, your hand is still up. No one else's is. Do you wish to speak or nope, you do not? Okay. Since I see no other individuals wishing to speak, we'll go put up the poll question. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And can we open up the phone lines for the 2 dial-in callers? So folks on the phone, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Thank you. I think we can close the poll. The motion carries with a vote of 84% to 13%, which satisfies the majority requirement. With that, I see that we have Congressman Lynch has joined us on the Zoom webinar. So Congressman Lynch, you are recognized. We should be able to unmute you, and there you are unmuted. Off you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I appreciate the opportunity just to appear before you and give a brief summary of what's happening in Congress in this week. As you may know, we have a major bill, the American Rescue Act, that President Biden has offered. It includes about $1.9 trillion in relief for states, cities, towns, counties, tribal governments that are facing both the impacts of COVID, but also the side effects of that in terms of lack of revenue and lack of vaccines in some cases, such as in Massachusetts. But briefly, the American Rescue Act would provide $160 billion for vaccine. That's both for producing the vaccines, but also doing contact tracing and distribution. It also provides about $130 billion to reopen schools safely. So that includes vaccines for teachers and school personnel, but also it includes mechanical improvements to ventilation systems for older schools that would have to be retrofitted in order to be safe for usage. It provides an unemployment assistance extension until September. We're having a debate about that right now. So there's one idea that we would extend the unemployment benefits until July and see what the rate of unemployment is in different states. And if it was over a certain level, we would extend it at that point further to September. So that's one wrinkle that has not yet been resolved, but the bill will be on the floor this week. It also provides a $1,400 stimulus check for people $75,000 and under. It also provides enhanced $25 billion for daycare because many people will not be able to return to work if their children are not back in school. So we try to address that eventuality. There's about 106 million for emergency paid leave, and also expanded sick leave that is to reimburse employers who, for the cost of allowing their employees to exercise paid sick leave. We have rental assistance of about $30 billion for those who are struggling to pay rent. $30 billion is prospective, and there's a $25 billion fund that has been established for back rent for people who have not yet received relief because of the lag between this and the CARES Act. There's a 15% increase in the level of SNAP assistance. That's the nutritional assistance program. Much of that has been exacerbated because in many communities across the country, a lot of these kids were getting their meals at school, the breakfast, lunch programs at school. And since kids are out of the schools for the most part, there's this increased need for the SNAP program. There's also $3 billion for WIC, Women, Infants, and Children program, and 350 billion is the largest chunk here, and that is to be shared by states, cities, counties, tribal governments, and towns. So that's based on population and also level of need. There's 35 billion that we set aside for small businesses. There's $20 billion that has been set aside for public transit systems, and also $9 billion has been aside for major airports based on the level of enplanement. So basically flying volume in each of the states, but Logan Airport would qualify for relief under that act. So that's basically that one bill. Two other bills that are up for this week. One is the American Wildlife Preservation Act, and the other is the Equality Act, which basically this has been through the House a couple of times, but always seems to get stalled in the Senate, but we're going to pass it again. It provides protection against discrimination on a number of grounds, including age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, gender, and sexual orientation. So we've passed these. We've passed the Equality Act on a couple of occasions already, and we're going to do it once again and hopefully get a better result in the Senate. Just wanted to thank you, Mr. Moderator, for your great kindness. I want to thank Walter Timothy, who called me and gave me a heads up about our town meeting tonight. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And it's an honor for me to represent the town of Milton in the United States Congress. I consider it a wonderful honor and privilege every single day. And I try mightily to live up to your highest expectations. So thank you for your kindness and your courtesy tonight. May God bless the town of Milton. Thank you so much for being involved in town meeting. This is where democracy really, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. But and God bless these United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, for joining us. With that, before proceeding to Article 2, I was contacted by Mr. Brian Walsh, who's a town meeting member and the chair of the Fire Station Building Committee. He wanted to propose a motion to the floor. So, Mr. Walsh, can we recognize you for that?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, Mr. Moderator, I would like to make a motion that we move Article 3 to be considered by the body prior to Article 2.
Could you explain your rationale?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Article 3 talks about the negotiations that are going on with the Select Board relative to potential purchase or lease with St. Agatha's property. And it has a role in Article 2, and we think it's best if we dispense of that first.
Thank you. The motion has been seconded by Ms. Agostino. Does anyone wish to speak to the article to advance Article 3 before Article 2? It's just, I see no hands raised, apparently no objections. So with that, we'll proceed to the vote. Can we put up the polling question? All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And can we open up the phones? On the phone, all in favor of advancing to Article 3, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, no. Thank you. We can close the poll. The motion carries with 97% yes, 7% no, and 3% abstain. So we will advance to Article 3, which you'll find on page 14 of your warrant. I'll read it accordingly. The warrant committee, let's see, to see if the town will vote to authorize the select board to lease a portion of land located at 432 Adams Street, identified in the town assessor's map G, lot 495, consisting of 0.5 acres more or less for the specific municipal use of constructing a fire station. 2, to enter into a lease agreement of 99 years on such terms and conditions as the select board deems reasonable and appropriate to act on anything related thereto. Now, since this did not receive a recommendation one way or the other from the warrant committee, we actually need a motion on the floor to submit this to the body. Does anyone wish to make a motion to submit this article for a vote? I see Ms. Agostino motions. So moves. Is there a second? If you could signify in the chat window if you second the motion. There's a second by Ms. Jean Burns. Thank you. With that, I'd like to recognize Ms. Collins, the chair of the select board. Ms. Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator and town meeting members. This came to the select board in December, and since then, the board has appointed Michael Zullis and Richard Wells as our negotiating team with the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. In that time, we've had to secure some consulting help. So we hired Landvest for valuation and Hemingway and Barnes as special counsel on contracts, and have been engaged in due diligence primarily. And since then, we've also, through our negotiating team, had 3 productive meetings, but we don't yet have something to bring to town meeting. We do hope to have that for May. And in addition, the board feels that it's a good opportunity to have some more community engagement and to hear from neighbors and other residents, their thoughts and concerns about the site and the East Milton station. So that's the board's update so far, and we hope to see you back in May with something in hand. Thank you very much.
Ms. Collins, are you making a motion to refer this back to the select board?
I am indeed, Mr. Moderator.
I thought that might be the case. Is there a second to refer this article back to the select board? I see a second by Mr. Walsh. Does anyone wish to speak to the motion to refer this back to the select board? Please raise your hands in the window. No hands being raised. We can, I see, nope, sorry, I see one hand. Mr. Gordon, Mr. Morrissey. Mr. Gordon, you are recognized. You just have to unmute, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Gordon, I'll assume I'll recognize you as soon as I get to our next speaker, who looks like they're ready. Mr. Frank Morrissey, you're recognized. Mr. Gordon, there you are. I see you. Thank you.
I raised my hand by mistake on that one.
Oh, okay. Then Mr. Morrissey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a I don't know if this is procedurally appropriate, but what's the effect of referring the article back to the select board? That means no vote tonight?
That's correct.
It's deferred, and then it's deferred until a later meeting?
Yes, yes, it would be up to the select board to decide when to submit it to the warrant committee for reconsideration, and then the warrant committee to include it in the warrant of a future town meeting. And they've declared their intent is to make that the May annual 2021 town meeting.
Thank you.
I see no other hands. With that, we can proceed to the vote to refer back. Can we put up the poll question, please? All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. Can we open up the phones as well? On the phone, all in favor of the motion to refer back to the select board, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you. We can mute the phones. And close the poll. The vote is 95% yes, 4% no, 1% abstain. So this Article 3 is referred back to the select board. With that, we'll proceed to Article 2. I did receive some information late breaking that the warrant committee has amended their recommendation. I see a question on a point of order. One of the members says, do they need the warrant committee to vote on the motion? Good point. I should have done that. However, I did consult with the warrant committee in our preparation meeting, and they assured me they were in support of the motion to refer back. So correct, Ms. Agostino, I should have checked. With that, we'll proceed to Article 2. So we have some new text in the recommendation. If we could display that text on the screen for the members. I'll read this, but what you should look for is there's a new sentence added at the end of this recommendation. So Article 2 recommended that the town appropriate the sum of $32,250,000 for the costs of constructing and equipping a new fire headquarters and 2 fire substations, and that to meet such appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the select board, be authorized to sell and issue bonds or notes to the town, aggregating not more than $32,250,000 in principal amount pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 44, Section 7(1) of the Massachusetts General Laws as amended, or any other applicable law, and that the select board be authorized to accept grants or gifts from any other public or private funding source relating to this appropriation. Any premium received upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote, in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 20 of the Mass General Laws, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. Said appropriation is contingent upon passage by the voters of Milton of a referendum question under Chapter 59, Section 21CK of the Mass General Laws, which exempts from the provisions of Proposition 2.5, so-called, the amount required to pay for the bond or bonds issued for the purposes of this article. That is the latest recommendation from the warrant committee. With that, I will ask if anyone wishes to, actually, I'm going to recognize some people first before we go to the voters. I'd first like to recognize Mr. Brian Walsh, who is the chair of the Fire Station Building Committee. Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And Brian Walsh, Precinct 8 Town Meeting Member and Chair of your Milton's Fire Station Building Committee. First, I want to apologize for not properly identifying myself when I spoke just a few moments ago. My apologies. So good evening, and thank you on behalf of the 11 members of your Fire Station Building Committee. We have been working hard since September 2017 and are very happy to explain the solutions we have determined and seek your support for them. Let me provide a quick overview of our presentation tonight. Due to the generosity of our Fire Station Building Committee member Jean Sullivan's daughter, Amy Sullivan, We have an 8-minute professional quality video that shows and explains the problems we have in Milton with today's fire stations. And with the cooperation of Needham's Fire Chief, Dennis Condon, the opportunity presented with the 21st Century Fire Station. Chief Condon will focus on the recently completed Needham Headquarters Station. An interesting tidbit is that as a town, Needham is very similar in size as Milton, with approximately 1,000 more residents and about 3/4 of a mile smaller in size, in square miles that is, than Milton. When we come back from the video, we will cover the designs, propose the cost, and the funding approach. But at this point, Mr. Moderator, let's show the video.
Yep, we're running it, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you.
It was built in the late 1800s, built for horses. This half of the building is an addition to fit the apparatus, because as time went on, the apparatus gets bigger and bigger. As the fire department increases its role in society, we're asked to do more. It's living in a garage, The kitchen is directly off the apparatus bay. The apparatus returns from a run or a day like today where there's road salt and everything else. The road salt gets in the air, gets all over the gear, gets all over it just stays in the air for a while. So it can get into the kitchen, it gets into the living space. It's unsafe. It's just, it's not good for the firefighters.
Not much has changed really since I was a kid. I used to come up here and the firefighters used to pump my bicycle tires with air when they ran low. So I've kind of seen it. There was an addition put on at one point. It's still pretty.
Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen, we noticed the video is frozen while the audio was advancing. We'll try to restart that.
It was built in the late 1800s, built for horses. This half of the building is an addition to fit the apparatus, because as
Sorry, Mr. Walsh, we tested this out, but we'll try to get this fixed for you.
No worries, completely understand, Mr. Moderator.
It was built in the late 1800s, built for horses. This half of the building is an addition to fit the apparatus, because as time went on, the apparatus gets bigger and bigger. As the fire department increases its role in society, we're asked to do more. It's living in a garage, The kitchen is directly off the apparatus bay. The apparatus returns from a run or a day like today where there's road salt and everything else. The road salt gets in the air, gets all over the gear, gets all over it just stays in the air for a while. So it can get into the kitchen, it gets into the living space. It's unsafe. It's just, it's not good for the firefighters.
Not much has changed really since I was a kid. I used to come up here and the firefighters used to pump my bicycle tires with air when they ran low. So I've kind of seen it. There was an addition put on at one point. It's still pretty much relatively the same.
If you took the 10 important aspects of a modern fire station and made a report card, these stations would fail. On every one of them, you get an F. Probably two of the oldest fire stations in the state would be Engine 4 up on Atherton Street and headquarters.
Well, there's no separate facilities, so I share restrooms, I share bedrooms, I share all common areas, I share all dressing areas with the guys. We just have to try and be as considerate of each other as we can.
The physical structure is starting to really show with the ceilings, the walls, the deterioration. They were well built, I'm sure, in their time, but they've been pushed to the limit.
An issue with the firehouse here is that you can see these lockers here. There's only probably about 2.5 feet between the lockers and the apparatus as it backs in. For them to get that, they got to squeeze in between the apparatus and you know, open the locker, get it whatever they need, put it back.
Lack of storage, lack of facilities for the guys to do training or working out to keep them healthier and stronger and ready to respond. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges.
Communication with the dispatch center, it's run on 18th century technology. It's a telegraph system, and it's the red fireboxes that you'll see outside in the area. It comes right into the firehouse, and we rely on that for each public building or a significant building, public building in town has a firebox on it, and that's connected directly to our dispatch center, and it's 18th century technology.
I have noticed there's some really modern and well-equipped facilities out there. Pretty impressive, and something that we obviously desired to have at one point in our careers.
Now that we're in here, things are sort of spread out, they're modern, they're clean, there's a lot of functionality, there's a lot of new stuff. The morale is much higher, I believe, in that regard, in their they look forward to coming into work. They look forward to walking through the door. It's like uplifting when you walk through here. It was before it might be sort of like a downer when you walk through the door. So there's a lot of fitness and health features built into the building, and there's some training features that give them a lot of opportunities to do different things throughout the day to better their craft and stay healthier and stronger so that they can serve the public better. There's quite a bit of space between the trucks, so you don't have people running into each other, and there's not things on the floor. There's a space for everything, so they get on and off the trucks a little bit easier and safer. We have a training tower that we put up rather than put in your typical interior stairway. We put in a graded stairway and a drain down below, so we can run water in there and they can do training evolutions. At each level there's a door where they can rappel out. We can put ladders in so we can practice all kinds of evolutions in there. We spend quite a bit on technology, but we're thinking ahead. The next 75 years, technology is not going away. Every room has a monitor on the wall, all the rooms of the offices. There's monitors in all the bunk rooms. And so that combines with being able to, keep track of what's going on in the world, especially when storms and that kind of stuff. We can see in real time what's going on. The gear lockers all have a power source so that they can plug in their flashlights that get charged, and they have USB there. And again, we're trying to think ahead. So all of the showers on the fire side of the building are all steam showers. And we also have a decon sauna unit. We know that firefighter cancer is a prevalent thing, and it's getting more prevalent. So the idea with the steam showers is to, after a fire, immediately take the steam shower upon coming back to work to try to get most of the stuff out of you. Your next shift in, you can go into the sauna unit. It's a small box similar to a sauna, but there's like a couple of bicycles in there, and you pedal the bike, you're in there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and you can sweat out whatever else that might be in your pores at that point. In the gear decontamination process, so we can come from the outside directly into the decon room. We have an extractor in there that washes the gear. It has an ozone attachment to it, so it also gets rid of biohazards that are on the gear as well. And there's separate drying facilities for the hitch gear and that sort of stuff. We also have a dishwasher type thing where you can put in your helmets, your boots, the SCBA and that stuff, and then that gets everything off of there. So there's a lot of focus on getting the turnout gear clean, but there's a lot of other stuff that we carry that hasn't been able to get clean, and that machine will allow that stuff to be cleaned as well. So if we help people be healthier during their career, then in the long term, they benefit because they're not coming down with these diseases, and the town benefits because they're not paying out disability retirements or disability injuries and that kind of stuff. So we're trying to put the investment now to keep people safe and healthy for the long term, and that's good for the individual, it's good for the town, and it makes financial sense in the long term.
The evolution of the fire service has changed considerably since I got on. It's really something that is just amazingly different, but our buildings haven't changed to compromise, to help that. I mean, we've literally been in a situation where we don't have storage room for anything, we don't have training rooms for anything. It's just we're in the same facilities that we were in, 100 years ago.
So the improvements with the new firehouses will just improve operations. It'll allow us to do our job better. You're going to get a better trained firefighter, you're going to get a healthier firefighter, you're going to get an educated firefighter, and you're going to have them operating in a place that is comfortable for them and is going to fit the needs of the fire department. So overall, it's just conducive to the overall operations of the department.
Mr. Walsh, you have any other further comments?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, thank you. Again, Brian Walsh, Precinct 8 Town Meeting Member and Chair of the Fire Station Building Committee. So, Mr. Moderator, we are asking tonight from Town Meeting for the funding to replace all 3 of Milton's fire stations. There are important and cost-saving reasons to take this approach. We know what the cost will be to build all 3. We strongly believe putting out one bid versus separate ones will save the town thousands of dollars. We want to move quickly as interest rates are likely only to go up. They're extremely low currently. And it's an attractive time right now to bid projects of this size. And we have great news. We can get these new buildings built at no increase to residents' tax bills due to prudent planning by the Select Board a few years ago. Tom Hurley and his Select Board saw that the costs being carried by the town for 2 building projects, the 6 new schools and the new public library, were decreasing at the same time they knew they would be dealing with rebuilding the fire stations and possibly some buildings at the DPW yard. So with the approval of town meeting, they submitted special legislation through the state senator and our state reps to, instead of letting the tax burden continue to decline, only to then suddenly rise again to deal with a new fire station project, they would capture that declining debt, level the taxes to residents and put it into a stabilization fund, and then start to use it to fund the fire stations. Mr. Moderator, the Fire Station Building Committee Vice Chair, Dan Clark, will go over this funding, with your permission, in great detail shortly in his presentation. And so, with your permission, Mr. Moderator, I'd like to allow Dan Clark to now take over the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Clark, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lynn, do you mind allowing me to share the screen because those slides have been edited slightly?
Let us just give you screen sharing, Mr. Clark, and you now have it.
Thank you. So my name is Dan Clark. I'm the Vice Chair of the Fire Station Building Committee, as our Chair, Brian Walsh, had indicated. I'm going to go through each of the stations one by one and give a design update. Some of it may be slightly repetitive for those that were able to attend one of our design webinars. I'll then finish up with the design update and transition into similar the second webinar we did, which was focusing on financing and budgeting of the stations. So this whole project, after we left town meeting in the spring of 2018, started with us hiring an architect and an OPM. And one of the first tasks that Context Architecture completed was a programming study, which was looking at each of the 3 stations and identifying all the components that need to go into each of these stations to identify how many bays, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, administrative offices, storage, and come up with a program and tell us how big do they need to be. And this was a process that was really vetted between the needs of the fire department and our committee, and coming back and forth and taking the lead from Context, our architect, who specializes in public safety projects and specifically fire stations, in terms of what is appropriate for staffing needs and station of our size. So through that process, we were able to finally come up with 3 programs, one for each of the stations, headquarters, and 2 substations. And that really dictated how big the buildings were going to be. At that point, we started asking Context to come up with a schematic design, an early kind of rendering of the form of the building, and then quickly led into an owner's project requirement. So that's actually a document that was developed by the Fire Station Building Committee. And that's a document that has a lot of significant information in, and it's a guiding document that's a living document throughout the process. It never stops really being used or updated throughout the duration of design and even into construction. It's got a lot of significant information in it. One of the important things that it talks about is the owner and user requirements. So what does the town have for an expectation on how the building is going to function? How is it going to be equipped? What kind of materials do we have an expectation for? Items like exterior building lighting designed to dark sky standards and shielding off and cutting off housings to limit the spread of light. Those are the types of things that go into this owner's project requirements. And we require that the designer follow this as a guiding document. Things like stormwater impact, and within this document, it outlines that we have an expectation that these projects will collect 100% of stormwater on site and and prevent runoff to adjacent properties and roadways. We also outline a lot of sustainability goals, and I did want to highlight that. Our committee spent a lot of time identifying what we wanted to be for a sustainability goal, and worked with Sustainable Milton and reviewed this with many stakeholders to identify the decision to go with an all-electric, carbon-neutral building. We set energy efficiency goals and EUIs and energy usage intensity. We set a goal of 100. The public safety national average for a building is 125. So you can see there's a significant those are a significant increase in energy usage. We did do a target LEED silver rating, and there's a lot of cost when you go for a LEED certification. Our committee made the decision to meet that standard, but not actually go through the process to get the plaque, as there's a lot of administrative costs throughout the construction process to be able to document that you've met that LEED silver rating. It didn't seem to be money well spent to get the plaque on the building, but we did want to meet the LEED silver rating for a sustainability goal. We identified on each of the 3 buildings ways to incorporate solar panels, high performance facade and windows design, building commissioning, making sure the building's really tight. And the last one is something that we've hit on a lot if you've been to any of our design meeting updates, which is the new design really incorporates a way to transition when you return back from a fire and you have contamination or carcinogens on you, to get out of that gear, get clean before you go back to the living quarters of the firehouse. We wanted to take a step further and eliminate the use of toxic materials within there, materials that are known to be off-gas carcinogens and things like that. So there's a project called the Living Building Challenge with a red list materials. Our committee really identified that as an opportunity to take this design a step further. So at that point, we really started engaging the community, and throughout the design process, there's been different points in which we've put our pencils down and we've reached out to the community to get feedback before continuing the design. At the end of schematic design in May of 2019, we had a specific design update meeting for each of the 3 stations in May, and really solicited feedback and went back and started designing more. We completed a sustainability charrette, getting stakeholders together. We had a great meeting at the library where people came together and we tried to figure out what we wanted to meet for sustainability goals. And my big takeaway from that meeting was that we wanted this project to be an example for future building town projects of what can be attained for sustainability and can be a gold standard to find cost-effective ways to make a sustainable building. In December, we then came back with a design update for all 3 stations and progress update. We hosted 2 meetings for that, one in the day and one at night, to try to accommodate as many people as possible. And that was all through December of 2019. Subsequently, at the end of this year, from September to October, we had additional meetings on the stations and really did a lot of outreach in October for the East Milton station. Is a lot of design and siting had gone on for that station. We utilized a lot of different resources to solicit community input. We had our website. We used the Milton Times and Milton Scene were great about publicizing the work we were doing. We had a Facebook page. We posted to Milton-related website Facebook pages. We've had numerous meetings with the Select Board, Warrant Committee, Capital Improvement Planning Committee, Master Planning Implementation Committee, Historical, DPW. Basically every board and committee in town has had a chance to work with us on this process. So where we're at today, as I had mentioned, the design development is completed for headquarters in Atherton. We have a schematic design for East Milton, and we have cost estimates for all 3 stations. And the East Milton station obviously is lagged behind a little bit because of the siting complications for it. But subsequent of that, we know that we have a good understanding of what the building size and shape needs to be and what it's going to cost to really build an East Milton station, because we know all the components that are really going to go into that station. So I'll focus on headquarters. This is an artistic rendering. You can see the original headquarters building on the right being maintained, something that we really worked on with Master Planning Implementation Committee, how that building was going to function and what the hardscape and softscape was going to look like out in front of it. And you see there's some steps down into the new headquarters entrance in between the 2. And this is really indicative of the approach that we took with phasing, because we wanted to build this headquarters with it being the biggest of the 3 stations and having a lot of operations out of it. We wanted to minimize the cost of temporary facilities or temporary housing. So we've designed the station in a way that during the whole construction process, until the fire department is ready to move in, the existing fire department stays operational, and then they move in, and then we demolish the old 1980s addition in between the 2 buildings, and then we rehab the first floor of the existing building into the training room for the fire department that can also be leveraged and utilized by the community for public meetings. This is a rear view from Walnut Street. We spent a lot of time working with the Town Center Neighborhood Association to get this right. We went through a lot of form functions in terms of what the shape of this building was going to look like, the cladding materials, and really sought their buy-in and support for what was going to be here for 100 years and have to be their neighbors. And it was a great working process between our architect and TCNA and the Fire Station Building Committee. So what exactly it looks like on site, you'll see here in the blow up here. We have this front space in front of the old original portion of the fire building. And then we have this open space in between, green space in the back. This is the current parking lot on the left-hand side that you would see today. It would get flipped onto the other side and the building would go in its place. The intent is for the firefighter parking to be back here, along with the ability to, on this corner of the building, use it as a training tower, similar to what you saw in the video earlier. And what that looks like in terms of a floor plan, you can see here on the left-hand side, the first floor, we show the training room that's intended to be used by the fire department and also the public. And that was really thought as a reason for pulling it out, was to make it more accessible for the public and make it easier to get in and out. We didn't want that training room to be buried within the station, that it's less likely to be used by the public. And that was something we saw in touring a lot of other fire departments. That is something that is a little more common in a lot of towns, is having that training room available for the public. As you can see here, the apparatus bay is color coded here in red, and it transitions into the administration area. And then on the second floor, we have mezzanine level above the apparatus bay, and then the living quarters, the kitchen, and the day room and everything in terms of bathrooms on the second floor. Materials that would be implemented on this headquarters building would be a lot of natural materials, red brick, wood veneer panels, some metal roof panels, curtain wall. And this is something we thought a lot about in terms of having a lot of glass on this building. There's some pros and cons to it, but really we saw a lot more pros, which is it's easier to maintain that main part of the building with all that glass on the apparatus bay. You're not spending money for drywall and interior finishes that are in really a garage type of space. So that we saw that as a big benefit. And actually the wall being an insulated glass unit like that actually does have good performance value nowadays compared to an old window. Transition to Atherton Station. We spent a lot of time on this. We went through a lot of iterations if it was more economical and cost effective to build completely behind it, demolish this station. Where we landed at the end of the day was, given how few old buildings and original buildings the town has, there wasn't a significant enough cost savings to really justify demolishing it. So our committee really landed on an addition and a renovation. And we really wanted it to fit the aesthetic and blend in with the Brush Hill neighborhood that it abuts. You can see here an opportunity with the siding, the new addition off to the back, because there's a steep slope as you go from 138 down towards Bradley and Atherton. This is a lower level parking area. We did identify an opportunity to put photovoltaic cells in the back. Given the slopes of the roof, it really wasn't an option to put it on the roof, but we think this is a great opportunity to have a PV field in the back by the parking lot. And what this looks like, as I mentioned, we have a ground floor, which is really getting up from that parking level, getting up to the second floor, which is the apparatus bay and the storage and the turnout gear and the lockers, and then the living quarters on the second floor. You really have to think of these buildings as as large garages with living space. They're really homes. These firefighters are there for 24-hour shifts. So you really need all the amenities that you have at a home. And I think everybody working from home nowadays has understood what that really means. In terms of materials, really taking from what was existing and complementing and blending it in, but not trying to mimic it too much. So we've got some cedar shakes, some similar stonework, some lap sliding. And I really think this building is a great example of how you can do an addition and complement and blend it. And I think it really speaks to our architect who has a good track record with doing historic fire stations previously. So to focus on East Milton Station, this is a little bit longer of an update because of all the siting implications around it. The first thing our committee did when we got appointed early on was reevaluate what the Fire Station Needs Committee had completed. And that was a recommendation that the existing station could no longer function as a 21st century modern station. And we went through a lot of iterations. A former member, John King, really led this effort and really identified that in our minds, there just was no way to get what the 21st century station needed without doing a significant increase in the land size. And we did look at the possibility of taking adjacent parcels, but they were just, you need about a half acre. A little bit less would be okay, but you need almost a half acre to get really that 21st century modern parking fire station on there to accommodate parking and setbacks and being able to function as a fire department. When we hired Context, we asked them to kind of take a third look at this and evaluate it. And what they really came back with, as you see on the screen here, is a small addition here in orange that could be accommodated. There's really not much opportunity on the side or the front, obviously, because of the fire department responding out of the front. And the parking on the side is where they currently can fit a truck or two to really do much more addition. And that really meant a stair tower at best. And we really were not able to accommodate, going back to that program that we identified, all the things that this station should have. We'd be spending a lot of money to get some of them, but certainly not all of them. So it really didn't seem like a wise investment for the town to spend all this money and have a less than standard 21st century fire station. In the course of all of our work, we also completed what are called runtime studies. If you were at the previous town meeting where we asked for design funding, these will look familiar, but we spent a lot of time understanding how moving any of the stations when we evaluated 2 versus 3 would impact the town. And the biggest takeaway that we had there was analyzing, where all the calls are for each of the stations and understanding what percentage can be covered in 4-minute runtime or less. And the standard is 90% or more for a town. Currently, Milton is operating right around 95%. Our committee really sought to not reduce that in any way. So we really wanted to identify how to place a station for East Milton in an area to not have a detrimental impact. And what we asked the third party that we hired to do this runtime analysis for us was, understanding how moving the station most likely to the west side of I-93, given the limited options on the east side, we really want to understand how big of an impact that would be. And we identified a few things with the fact that 75% of the calls are on the west side of I-93, and approximately 70% of the homes for the East Milton district are on the west side of I-93. So we asked our vendor to give us a boundary to work within, some framework that we knew we could be safe to relocate a station. And that's that red outline box that you have here on the left-hand side of the screen. And they said to us that if you kept it within those boundaries, there'd be negligible impact on that runtime coverage, call volume distribution, and it would be actually a more centrally geographic location for the fire district. Some of those dots that you see are other locations that we've vetted throughout the process, throughout the entire duration of our committee's work. So what we did was looked at town-owned property that are under the purview of several different jurisdictions within town. We solicited RFPs for sale and lease from private individuals. We were able to develop a matrix. And we even went further and looked at state-owned land for opportunities that might work. And some of those additional sites are listed on the bottom, but what we really got at the end of the day were 8 sites that we really, as a committee, thought we could spend some more time and money and due diligence on understanding the site comparisons that you see here on the left-hand side, which is the lot size, the visibility, access, buildability. And these were all items that were vetted by Context, our architect, who has spent a career doing fire stations and public safety work. So we really leaned on their expertise to understand and comparing these sites for a fire station. And it's important to note that we're not comparing one of these to each other. We're not saying that these dots are meant to be one versus the other. It's really meant to be versus an ideal scenario. If you could draw anything you wanted for a fire station, what would the ideal scenario be? That's what it's comparing back to. And we really started to gravitate towards a couple, the Milton Arts Center and a property at 432 Adams Street next, that's part of the St. Agatha's parcel. We really started to look at those individually more and take surveys and plot plans and really identify which of those would be the most beneficial to the town as a whole, thinking the entire town, but also East Milton Fire District. And this photo on the right is actually the St. Agatha's site that we've looked at. And what you see is in the red, a outline of the East Milton Fire District. And I wanted to show this to show how pulling it to the west side of the deck actually geographically starts to center the station. But I also wanted to share that the black lines are the main thoroughfares that you see for that fire district. And really what we've been able to do, and we identified, is that by having it on this main thoroughfare that runs east-west, you have easy access to these other thoroughfares. And you really segment the East Milton Fire District into these different zones. And what it allows you to do is to get to these different zones through main thoroughfares to be able to respond quickly. So it's a really good location from that standpoint. Being on that main thoroughfare is one of the first things, if you read any National Fire Protection Association articles about citing a fire department these days, it's one of the first things that they hit early in that process. So exactly what this site would look like. I wanted to show this plot plan because you can see the footprint here of the proposed station, and then you can see the size of the rectory. And the subdivision would be this dark black line that you see here coming around. And we operated within the zoning requirements of maintaining the side and front and rear setbacks. And you can see how we, it's tight, but we fit in within the setbacks. This is not a final design in any way. This is what we, based on the input we've received to date, thought made the most sense. St. Agatha's had identified that the road that currently spills out closer to Libby Road would need to be maintained. It would be straightened out and maintained as a two-way in out. Additionally, we saw an opportunity to create buffers for this site, vegetative buffers, but it could be hardscape buffers or fencing around this. And the intent behind this station, the parking back here currently shows 7. There's 3 firefighters that work in this station. So it's intended that 3 can come in, park, get into the building, while the other 3 that are on staff can get out and leave. So that's the intent for that to be parking. If an occasional need for the public to come visit that station, which is seldom given that most of the operations are out of headquarters, there would be an opportunity, and there's a handicap spot in the back. Just looking at this different visually, I wanted to show it with a different map so you can identify the subdivision of the lot, how the road would look straightened out. This would be Libby Road and Adams Street. You can see how we're right on the main thoroughfare there. And I did want to identify how the neighborhood traffic flows would change. This is something we looked at, knowing that we're putting a fire station in there. We wanted to educate ourselves on how traffic flows around the school and then the direct abutters. And the intent behind this is to really show that at the end of the day, the biggest change for the traffic is that this road that comes out at the corner of Libby, Governors, and Adams gets straightened out, and the curb cut ends up closer to the rectory. Similar image, just zoomed in case people weren't able to see it on the last slide. In terms of what this station would look like, it's approximately 28 feet tall. It's a 2-story apparatus bay on the first floor, living quarters on the second floor, similar to the last 2 stations that I had shown. Materials are a little unknown at this point. We're not as far in as design. The form and the shape of this building can still change based on input from the community. So we still have opportunities to make changes. Right now, we're kind of lending it, taking some of the design elements from the headquarters and kind of applying here. But that doesn't mean it can't go more of a residential look and less of a commercial look that we have today. And then this rendering is really to show how this building height really fits with the rectory next door, and how we kind of have it cascading down as it's closer to Libby and a little shorter to make it fit the neighborhood a little bit better. Like I said, it's a 1 apparatus bay on the left-hand side here, decontamination, turnout gear, and a flow into the center administrative areas, and then living quarters, personal lockers, and day room, kitchen upstairs on the second floor. This is just another rendering that our architect had put together prior to that previous rendering that I'd shown, trying to understand the massing and the scale and the size of the building to make sure it was appropriate for the location. So I'm going to transition to project budgets. I'm happy to go back at the end to answer any design questions, but I did want to focus on the project budgets because that's the big question in this article. And with construction projects, it's broken into 3 cost categories: soft costs, which are the designers, the legal fees, any loan interest, anything that's not a physical tangible item. And then there's hard costs, which are the physical parts of the building, all the stuff that goes into it, the furniture, the beds, the technology that you see in it. And then there's other costs, which are not really a soft or a hard cost. And typically that's usually land acquisition. So those are our real 3 categories. The 2 we're going to focus on are soft costs and hard costs. The Fire Station Building Committee has excluded that land acquisition other cost category because it's a select board article to take up. So we've kept that subsequent of our funding, knowing that the select board would be working on that. So for construction projects, a breakdown of what the costs are and how contingencies work, because it's a question we got a lot. Approximately 70% of a construction of a new project construction, the hard cost there would be about 70%. You have 10% typically for design, and then there's ancillary miscellaneous items that fill in the rest of the budget. I really wanted to emphasize that because we know, 70% of that cost is coming from one element, and that's the construction. And we spent a lot of time going through line by line items of what goes into that 70%. And then for contingencies, depending on where you're at in the design phase, you have a design contingency built in for unforeseen conditions or design changes. And as you work towards construction documents, that number becomes smaller and smaller. So for headquarters in Atherton, we currently have a 3 to 5% design contingency budget built in. And for East Milton, it's 7 to 10. When we get to this construction document phase, that number would go to 0. So if we haven't used our design contingency, it's money that is there that can be transferred to the construction project, or the cost of the project can go down a little bit. And then once you get to construction, we're carrying construction contingencies within the cost estimate of that construction portion. So as you get more and more through design, you can bring those numbers down farther and farther. So in terms of the construction budget, these are 38, 40-page documents that go through line by line that are shared on our website. And it goes through each building element, demolition, the concrete, the masonry, every single nuanced line item in a very granular level, and looks at the quantity and looks at what the cost per square foot for each is. And our committee went back and forth on a lot of this in terms of trying to find ways to cut costs. We also spent a lot of time evaluating, are there opportunities to think about these construction projects differently? We looked at pre-panelized and prefabricated buildings. And unfortunately, just given the sizes of the building, they don't lend themselves to that economy of scale to be able to take advantage of those cost savings. But we turned over every rock in terms of ways to find cost savings as a committee from day one, and really carried it through the past few, even into the past few weeks, getting ready for town meeting. So this is the overall project budget, and I highlighted the construction costs because it's one component of it that we were just talking about, and you see what those costs are. There's also the architectural engineering service fees, administrative fees, miscellaneous costs, the furnitures and fixtures that go into each of the buildings. And that's really, the fitness equipment, the chairs, the desks, those sorts of things. It's not the actual equipment. We're not buying any new fire equipment in terms of apparatus, no new engines, no new ladder trucks, no new vehicles. It's just the items that go in the building that stay in the building. And then there's also contingencies built into these, and then escalations based on when the Fire Station Building Committee believes each of these stations can go into construction. So from there, we really focused on what a cash flow would look like and what that schedule looks like for each of these 3 stations that you see across the top. And really, the cash flow is a bell curve. As you start to ramp up construction, you peak out at about depending on the length, about 40 or to 50% of the construction process, and then it tapers down. So we did this on a project by project basis for a cash flow, and then carried it through as a total project to understand how much money do we need each fiscal year to be able to construct these buildings. And we spent a lot of time with former town accountant Amy Dexter, town treasurer, the capital improvement planning committee, really trying to understand these numbers and how it impacts the town, both for this project and how do we bond this and how do we afford this, but how does it affect the town holistically with all the other needs and items going on in town. We also looked at, and this is prudent that we had this tonight, knowing that the CPA was coming down the road, we asked the architect, who has spent a lot of time doing historic projects in the past, to identify if there's an opportunity for us, in his opinion, to submit a grant application for CPA funding to help offset some of the costs. And these were the lists that our architect were able to come up with, that he saw as highly merit-based and that a CPA committee would likely support. So our committee's thought for this would be to apply for 2 grants, one for headquarters, one for Atherton, as you go into construction, so not at the same time. And we also wanted to understand, what this funding request meant. The CPA is a new funding mechanism that a lot of people in other committees are probably in town are going to want an opportunity for. So we didn't want to be, egregious with our requests. So based on what the CPA can generate in terms of funding each year, for example, the headquarters station would be tapping into about 25% of the available funds that they have for 1 year. So we thought it was a reasonable request to go with planning a CPA grant into the project. So to focus on the funding, this is the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund that Brian was talking about earlier today. And the easiest way that I've found to summarize it is you have existing debt from the school building and library project that's declining over time. And what this legislation did was froze it and charged the taxpayers the same amount, even though we actually owed less on that debt. And the delta, that green shaded area in the middle, is the funds that are being set aside for either a DPW or a fire station building committee project. And that project has bonding capacity for $50 million. You look at the numbers we're talking about tonight, there's capacity left over for a future DPW project if it comes to fruition. So we're also cognizant of that, of making sure that this legislation was intended for 2 things, that future opportunity exists. And this is what that schedule looks like. As you look here, the first column is the fiscal year. The deposit to the stabilization fund is that middle column. And then subsequently it builds up over time as you get more and more additional deposits into the fund. I do note here that in 2030, you can see that it caps out at 2.3 million, just a little bit more than $2.3 million. That's the amount that it was frozen at. And so there could never be more than that levied against the taxpayers to go into this. So this is something that all the taxpayers of Milton have started to pay for, and this is where, as you look at the orange line, Brian was alluding to, without raising our taxes, there's a way to fund this, and it goes back to the previous select board thinking about not having a big dip and then a big spike in the residential taxes. So for funding this and bonding schedule, working with Unibank, they recommended doing a structuring the debt to reduce the early years of principal payments. And the reason for that is, we early on, there's the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund doesn't generate as much money as one might like, but you get 5-10 years into it and it's got a good revenue generation stream. So you do that by doing a level debt service. And so these charts here, the blue is the principal being paid over the year, orange is the interest, and then the principal and interest is the larger gray number in the background that you see running through 2056. And you can see going out to bond 3 times in 22, 24, and 26 for those subsequent amounts. And what that actually looks like when you put all these pieces together, fiscal year on the far left here, going through the years, and then flowing over to the right-hand side of the chart, issuing different notes at different points, what the principal and interest payment is, and then the cumulative balance. So what's in that stabilization fund minus the principal and interest, and it can never go negative. You see in year 2043, it gets down to a little less than 2,000, but doesn't go negative. And the reason why you see the colors, the yellow and the green there, is without these 2 items, the funding wouldn't work. We would have to delay it and delay it quite a few years. And so given the future needs of the town on the horizon, the Fire Station Building Committee thought it was prudent to find a way to make this funding work now so that these projects can get underway and future projects can be budgeted appropriately. There was $600,000 set aside in a capital stabilization fund when the fire station building committee received design funding, and that was put there as a safety net in case our project never went to construction. And the reason being is the money we're spending on designs can't be bonded for more than 5 years, but if there's a construction project, it can be bonded with over the full life of the construction project. So the select board and the capital improvement planning committee set that money aside as a safety net in case we couldn't bond it over a longer period. Our recommendation would be to take a portion of that and put it into the stabilization fund by 2022 to help make this funding mechanism work. Additionally, we've mentioned earlier those 2 CPA grants. As long as we could get both of those CPA grants approved by year 2025 and put into the stabilization fund, that was the other element that would make this funding mechanism work. If the CPA grants weren't approved, it would have to go back to the Capital Improvement Planning Committee and the Select Board and Warrant Committee and Town Meeting to come up with funds to offset that $640,000 before fiscal year 25. And I did want to make a note that if no DPW project went into effect, the last year that $2.39 million roughly would be levied is actually roughly year 2053. And then there would be a little bit of money left in the fund that would go back against the tax levy. So what exactly do the next steps look like then? I mentioned we previously got design funding. We're here tonight to get construction funding. Pending special town meeting approval for construction funding, the next step would be to exempt the debt. The town's required to exempt it on a ballot question. So pending this approval, we anticipate it being a ballot question on the April annual town election. If it's approved at the ballot, it would then come back to the warrant committee, back to town meeting to actually authorize funding from the special purpose stabilization fund. That we would anticipate as a May annual town meeting article. So this is not the last opportunity for this town meeting to ask questions and kind of have control of this process. This is just the first step in the process. So with that, I'm sure there's plenty of questions, and Brian and I and whoever will start to go.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Clark, Mr. Walsh, any last comments or all set?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just thank you for your time. I know it seems like a long presentation. There's so much detail to this, and public safety is so important to the town. We felt we had to give you a foundation to ask your support.
Thank you very much. I see 3 hands raised, and we have one citizen who has asked permission to speak. I think I'll alternate. The first, Mr. Keel, you're recognized. Mr. Keel, you still there? Sorry, I lost my participants. Hand down. Okay, then we'll go to Ms. Agostino. You're recognized.
Good evening, Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. We've waited a long time for this to come before us, and I just wanted to mention a few items. I mean, a lot of us have spent a lot of time in our homes, so we may not have seen how exponentially Milton has been growing. Both the commercial, the residential construction is absolutely booming. I don't know how our building department keeps up with it. We've got the new schools, new library, council on aging, new restaurants, mega mansions are popping up in all the neighborhoods, apartments, condos. They all require these new fire stations. And interesting, while you may not realize it, it was over 30 years ago that the poor condition of our firefighters first came to the attention of the elected officials. 30 years we've been waiting for tonight, and I really feel that tonight is the night that we can finally recognize, thank, and support our firefighters. Because when they have these new fire stations, then it really is our public safety that they will be protecting. We'll protect them with the fire stations, and they'll protect us with the work that they do. They work and they live in these stations, and 24/7, they're there just like the police. I am just thrilled And I want to ask if it is at all possible for us to have a unanimous vote to pass Article 2 in order to really make this a unanimous vote for our public safety. I want to thank the committee and all the hard work. It's been a long 30 years, and I'm very excited that we're here tonight. So thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, I'd like to ask our citizen to announce himself. Mr. Renz, could you unmute your mic and state your name and address for the committee and your brief remarks? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, just fine.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Justin Renz. I reside at 48 Walnut Street, which is diagonally across the street from the headquarters fire station. I live with my wife and 3 children, and I'm the president of the Town Center Neighborhood Association, otherwise known as the TCNA. Our association covers the rectangular shaped area behind the town hall and the central fire station created by Clapp, Fairbanks, and Walnut Street. It includes Bonad, Stanton, Taylor, Magnolia, and the sections of Central Ave and Reedsdale Road. 71 households currently are part of our association. Since September of 2018, the TCNA has been attending each and every fire station building committee meeting, as we feel like we are large stakeholders in the development of the headquarters site, and we want to be able to have a voice in this process. Through the years, we've worked very closely with Chair Brian Walsh and Vice Chair Dan Clark and the team, and it's been an excellent cross-functional process. We really feel that the Fire Station Building Committee has worked very well with the neighbors in the town center, has always accepted our questions and comments thoughtfully, and provided very good feedback. Some designs of the headquarters site have been tweaked throughout the past month due to neighborhood concerns and comments. The Fire Station Building Committee has listened to us. It's been a great working relationship for the past 3 years. In addition, we've also attended numerous Master Planning Implementation Committee meetings that have focused on the impact of the central fire station construction and what impact that may have on future amenities in the remaining green space and surrounding town center. I'd like to speak tonight also in support of having a fire station in one's neighborhood. If I look out my kitchen window, I can see the central fire station as my direct neighbor across the street. I've been a Walnut Street resident for over 10 years and a Milton resident for the past 20. As I mentioned, Walnut Street consists of 10 homes, of which 19 children under the age of 18 currently reside. In my conversations with former Chief Grant and current Chief Madden, it's my understanding that approximately 25 to 30% of all calls to headquarters necessitate the firefighters to exit onto my neighborhood, specifically Walnut Street, as opposed to exiting onto Canton Avenue. As that is, the firefighters are incredibly respectful so as to not to turn on the sirens on the trucks on Walnut Street. They actually wait till they exit the neighborhood onto Reedsdale Road. They're also very sensitive and courteous when returning back from their calls onto Walnut Street, so as to use caution as they are aware of the many children that actually live on this street. The firefighters have been great neighbors, very courteous, and an asset to my neighborhood. My wife and I bought our current home knowing the central fire station would be our direct neighbor. And personally, it's great to know that the headquarters is right across the street from me, rather than seeing it as a distraction or a disturbance. This has not been the case at all for my family living as an abutter to the central fire station for the last 10 years. I support the fire station project as a resident of the town of Milton. I support the fire station project as an abutter to the headquarters site. And I hope tonight the town meeting members will support the fire station project and pass this article. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Well said. Next, I see 2 hands, Mr. Walker, Mr. White. Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I'd like to thank the committee for its diligent work and for getting us to this point. It's obvious that they took their responsibilities quite seriously and have provided us with some critical options at this juncture. The video I thought was particularly helpful, and it gives us much to anticipate and to look forward to. Particularly the idea of equipping the facilities with equipment that allows our firefighters to become healthier during their careers is a smart move from an employer perspective on the town's part and from a safety perspective. Given the building committee's work, and even before there was no question, as Ms. D'Agostino said, that the town needs new fire stations and probably a new police station, given that our current station still has a propensity for flooding, but more on that later. The questions that I have to do with the proposed designs. As recently as 2017, during my time on the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, then Chief Jack Grant argued quite strongly that the renovation of the fire stations was not a viable option and the construction of new facilities was required. And the building committee in its May 8th, 2018 presentation to town meeting noted that the current East Milton location concluded that a fire station of a 21st century design could not be constructed at that existing location. So that certainly made sense then as it does now. But after reviewing the design renderings, I'm left with the question then of why it makes sense to construct a new expansive Engine 1 facility, a new Engine 2 facility, but to propose what are described as renovations and expansion for Engine 4. And I'm glad that everyone got to see the video because you noted that 2 of our fire stations, 1, Engine 2 and Engine 4, are more than 100 years old and potentially 2 of the oldest fire stations in the state. So I think it's important to answer the question why, rather than propose a new facility, a new 21st century facility that, similar to the other 2 that are proposed, would be focused on sustainability and LEED standards, we instead would be asked to approve a proposal that a 100-year building is still adequate and simply needs renovation and expansion. So I think it's important to answer these kinds of questions because we want to discourage any perceptions that our town resources are allocated based on location rather than on need. And I would offer to the select board and my town meeting colleagues that it's critical that we started the things like the Racial Justice Committee, Equity and Justice Committee, but these are the kinds of things where the rubber meets the road, specifically that in one part of our town, we've proposed to build a brand new facility. In another part of our town, we've proposed to build a brand new facility. And in the part of our town where we have a large elderly population, we have a large population of college students, and most of our residents of color live, that we should simply try to make it work with the 100-year-old building. So initially I was going to ask pose that question to the building committee, but I suspect that given Mr. Clark's presentation, he would simply offer what he offered in the presentation, which is that for the sake of neighborhood character, this is probably a good idea for our part of town. I, as you might expect, disagree, but I intend to vote for this article because I don't believe that it's the article that's the problem. It's the design recommendations that are the problem. So my perhaps more important question is whether the recommended $32 million appropriation allows for the construction of a 21st century design for Engine 4, a new building that meets sustainability and LEED standards, whether the $32 million appropriation allows for that if the select board should direct such. And since the recommendation uses the language for the cost of constructing and equipping, I don't see any need to propose any amendment to the language. But I would seek a commitment from the select board that they ensure that any new town buildings meet the same aesthetic and quality standards wherever in our wonderful town they are constructed, and that our part of town gets the 21st century design building that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Mr. Hiss, can I answer the question?
I actually like to hear yours and the select board because the select board was specifically referred to by Mr. Walker, but go ahead.
So Mr. Walker, I was just going to share my screen and go back to the slide to explain it. I probably didn't explain this well enough, so my apologies if I went through it quickly. The majority, as you can see on here, this gray outline that you see here is the original portion of the Atherton station. And you can see over here, this portion here that I'm outlining is the original. All of the stations, all three, are being designed with the same sustainability goals, the same LEED goals, all of those items that I identified in the owner's project requirements. That's not a requirement just for one station or another. Those are goals that are intended for all three of the stations, regardless of addition or renovation or new construction. For the most part, you can really consider the Atherton station, really a new station. The vast majority of it, the apparatus bay is all new. This decon facility in the back, everything that you see here on the back is all new. I wouldn't consider this a lesser. The point I was making earlier by saying it's a renovation and we wanted to maintain that character, we did that knowing that there would be big hurdles to achieve. So this facility, and I should have mentioned this earlier, this is the only facility that requires temporarily housing and doing temporary conditions for the three projects. The firefighters will have to actually leave the station to do the work because it's going to be completely gutted on the inside and brought up to 21st standards. So there's nothing that I would consider this as a lesser station, but more of aesthetic design intent. And we did spend a lot of time studying a complete demolition, and there really wasn't benefit or an overwhelming reason to do that we couldn't get the station we needed out of renovation. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, I'm certainly, you can come back to the microphone and ask again.
Mr. Walsh, you had your hand raised. I see you've dropped it. Okay, thank you. Ms. Collins, could you also respond to Mr. Walker's question?
Mr. Moderator, I respectfully ask for a few moments. I just would like to caucus with the rest of the board.
Yes, please. We'll
Thank
take
you,
it.
sir.
Yep, we'll just go on mute for a few minutes. If folks are wondering why we're silent, the select board is just in discussion, considering the answer to Mr. Walker's question about whether the article's funding can provide for an all-new firehouse on Atherton Street.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes, Ms. Collins.
I'm ready to
Yeah, please.
speak. Thank you. Melinda Collins, Select Board Chair and Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. It's been the board's understanding all along that the Atherton Station was being constructed to the same standards that the other two stations were being designed to, and the intent all along has been that it would be a 21st century station. We believe, as Mr. Clark had been just stating, that that's exactly what the Fire Station Building Committee has been doing. And they have just, in this case, at the same time, been able to maintain that facade of the historic building, which, as we know, is a really important feature for our residents. They speak up quite frequently about that. But the board believes that the design thus far it is exactly that, a 21st century design, and we're pleased to be able to put that forward. So
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Agostino, you're recognized for a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, my point of order question was that I heard Town Meeting Member Walker say he was supporting the article. I didn't exactly hear, and I wanted clarification, if he was actually suggesting, once he actually, saw Dan's explanation as well as heard the selectmen, if he was actually suggesting completely demolishing the historic, which may be how some of this funding from the CPA is coming about, if he was really making that suggestion, or that. So that's my point of order. If you could clarify on that.
I'm happy to. I heard that Mr. Walker was satisfied with the article as it written. He just had a specific question of, could the funding support an entirely new fire station? And I think I heard answers to that effect from both Mr. Clark and Ms. Collins.
So that you're in it. So Mr. Walker's got the answer that it is a completely new fire station and that it's just maintaining the beautiful facade. Is that correct?
I would assume so, since Mr. Walker has not raised his hand again, but if he did, we would recognize him. I have a number of other speakers, by the way, who would like to speak. Mr. Walsh, did you have a further answer on that question?
Yeah, just briefly, Mr. Moderator, Brian Walsh, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8, Chair of the Building Committee. It absolutely is a completely 21st century standard building. We looked at it, frankly, as Dan Clark did mention in the presentation, we worked with many of the groups in town, including Milton's Historical Commission, and that rock facade and overall structure of the front of that building, they were strongly encouraging us to save that. So we have saved the facade. We're building a completely new fire station around it, and it's absolutely up to the same standards as the other two. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mr. White, Mr. Tangney, Ms. Kelly, Mr. Mullen, and Ms. Friedman Hanna. So Mr. White, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Bill White, Precinct 6, Plymouth Ave. Excellent presentation tonight from Dan and Brian. Thank you very much for all of your work. I am over here. Also, just a quick shout out to my friend on Walnut Street. I enjoyed listening to his conversation and comments. We
My family grew up in that neighborhood right on the corner of Fairbanks and Walnut, and fire engines didn't always shut off their sirens as they went down in the middle of the night. But it was great growing up there. It was great, playing stickball on the fire station field, using the candy machine there, getting our bikes pumped up, etc. And so it was a great neighbor to have and a great part of our childhood. So, glad to see that the neighborhood is still alive and kicking. But now, of course, I'm on the other side of town and near the proposed new building. And, a lot of my neighbors did write me a letter and shared it with some other town meeting members and, made some thoughtful, objections, concerns. And I just wanted to touch upon them because, I think actually, Dan, in your presentation, you addressed many of them really quite articulately, particularly on your efforts to look at the traffic situation, which was a big concern for the neighbors there, as you know. A lot of conversation about the kids on the nearby streets and what's happening, at the school, et cetera, and keeping safety as a forefront. I think you guys addressed that pretty well and how this facility would be kind of separated from that area. There was some talk about the neighbors have kind of questioned whether it would be envisioned that this engine would travel on, Rose Street and in Governor's Road, the cut through there, and whether, I might ask if you could address that question and whether, that's something that is going to happen or try to be avoided. The other issues that were raised, a lot of concerns from the neighbors about stormwater, but Dan, I think, you hit that pretty well and thoroughly, talking about how there would be absolutely no excess stormwater, that would be discharged into the neighborhood or into the adjoining streets. So I think that is well articulated. And then the final kind of question is, we deferred Article 3 because there's more work to do. But I think the chair of the selectmen indicated, also an opportunity for more engagement. And so I just wanted to see, how that will take place between now and the May town meeting. But I just wanted to raise those issues on behalf of my neighbors and again, thank the fire committee, particularly Brian Walsh and Dan for their excellent work, as well as the other members. So if anybody could hit some of those issues, I'd be grateful.
Thank you, Mr. White. So I heard the cut through and how to engage the neighborhood in the East Milton station. Mr. Walsh or Clark, can you address the cut through question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brian Walsh, town meeting precinct 8, town meeting member and fire station committee chair. And thank you, Mr. White, for the question and the observations, because this is extremely important to us. And whether we were dealing with a previous Chief Grant or our current Chief Madden, they always make it crystal clear that the fire stations really want to stick to the main roads. They're not like commuters. They're driving a big, heavy truck that if there happens to be traffic on the road, they want to have a wide enough space that they can lean on the horn, someone will pull over and they can get around them and keep moving. That is not as affordable on some of those side streets. So in particular, to address the streets that you mentioned, Mr. White, the only time they're going to see the fire trucks on those streets are when they're required to get down there to service somebody that's in need. Mr. Clark, actually, we took the time to point that out in the East Milton map, showing how the main streets sort of snake around the town. They'll stay on those and they'll turn down side streets only if they have to get to a fire call. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Perhaps for either Mr. Walsh or Ms. Collins, how will you engage the East Milton neighborhood in the selection decision process? Ms. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Melinda Collins, Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. Typically, we have a hearing, well, this wouldn't be a hearing, but some kind of a time set aside in a regular meeting. But we may because we have so much business, this may be something that we do a couple of sessions that are set aside especially. And we would have the fire station building committee with us as well. So I think that we've yet to sort of design how we're going to do that. And we also, though, now that we have specific people to speak with and help coordinate, I think that's very helpful as well, because we can have something for general public, because other residents may also want to speak about this and let the select board know their thoughts. But we could make sure we do some extra outreach to make sure that people know this is happening, even though I think that the fire station building committee's strategy of trying to use social media and the paper and also the town website worked fairly well. Since we're talking about a particular site now, there's an opportunity to reach out in those ways, but also reach out directly to the neighborhood. So as I said, we don't have anything designed in particular. Generally, we take those up at our regular Wednesday meetings, which are the second and fourth Wednesdays in the evening, so that people have time to get home and after work, or commute from the next room at this point. But we will definitely communicate that, and people have our emails too. So please email and call, and we'll get that information to you in a number of ways. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. White, your hand is still up. Did you have follow-up? Hands down. Guess not. We'll go to Mr. Tangney, if I'm pronouncing that right, sir.
Yes, that's correct. Nick Tagney, town meeting member, precinct 3. I have 3 questions. The first is that the use or the creation of the SPSF seems really smart and thoughtful, but I'm curious why now we need to go for a vote of the voters since it's already been approved, is my first question. The second question is, how will the utilization of the SPSF relate to the future construction of the new school that the school committee is laying the groundwork for? It would seem like that might be the first project, since it was sort of originally created for the school building originally, that might be utilized for that fund. And my third question is, I'm curious how we can go about approving construction funds for the East Milton Fire Station when we don't actually have a site. And I was curious how that worked just technically, because that seems like we're putting the cart before the horse. So those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Collins, can you answer why we have to go to the voters for the SPSF?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Melinda Collins, Chair of Select Board, town meeting member, precinct 9. So a town meeting created through special legislation, the fund. However, there needs to be a debt exclusion because debt still needs to be issued. And so what's going to the voters is approving a debt exclusion for that amount of money to be for bonds to be issued for that money. And then the special purpose stabilization fund will be used to service that debt. So it's a two pieces, like a 2-piece mechanism. If that answers that question.
It does. The second question was, how does the SPSF, why is it prioritized to the firehouses versus the school that is also under a building committee right now?
So the legislation was written for the fire stations and DPW specifically. It was not written for a school building project. Does that suffice?
It sounds like it does. We'll check for a follow-up. And the third, perhaps, Mr. Walsh, how would you proceed with the project and the funding for the article tonight without knowing the exact location of the East Milton, or let's say the lease approved for the East Milton site, until the select board brings that back?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yeah, and I'm glad the question came up again, because I understand it's a question and it's important to a lot of people. The point is simply this: we have looked at some 15 sites in depth for the East Milton Station location. We have identified what we believe by far and away is the best site, and the select board is working on that best site. And we'll know in the not too distant future, presumably by the May town meeting, whether that'll work. But if it doesn't, the construction of that fire station the cost is essentially the same no matter where we construct it. There may be some other ancillary costs, but we are confident as a committee that we have the money to get that East Milton Station fire station done. And for the reasons I explained earlier, it's important that for us to be able to go out to bid the cost of all three, the construction of all three, to significantly provide savings to the town. The timing is good to handle large projects like this. And the sooner we can move, we think it's better in terms of interest rates are at a great low level and they're only going to get higher. So please understand, we're able to, we know the size of the station, we know what has to go into the East Milton Station, we have priced that accordingly, and we can build that at a number of locations. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. I still have Ms. Kelly, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Friedman had Ms. Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mary Kelly, Precinct 9. I echo the sentiments of all that have praised those who have worked long and hard over many years to get us to this point, and am fully supportive of the effort to improve all of our fire stations. I just have a couple of questions. One is, in previous school articles, school building articles, the words repair, renovation, remodeling, and even demolition have been included in the article. Is there a reason that this article doesn't include that same type of language, number one? And what does that mean for what can be, I guess, attributed to the 32 million? And then the second is, assuming that the East Milton site is as presented, there will obviously be a sale of the old fire station. Could that sale be put to offset some of the costs of this project? Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, can you answer the choice of language in the article?
Yeah, it's interesting, Mr. Moderator. I guess I would have to have looked historically at it. I guess I can answer it this way. We're confident that we have covered all the costs. Frankly, the headquarters stations, we have a very detailed scheduling of what gets demolished so the firefighters can still, provide the service. Then what gets renovated. It's a whole long laid out strategy to accomplish it, to start with the old building and end up with the completely new building while at the same time maintaining the fire service out of there. So all of that is covered, what we have to tear down and what we have to rebuild. Same is true of Atherton Street. And, again, we have an adequate budget to build the East Milton Fire Station as well. And so, I guess it's probably the difference is we've worked hard with our architect and our folks to understand what the costs all would be and to make sure they're in the budget, and they are in there.
Can you also answer the question of what impact potential sale of land for the current East Milton Fire Station would have on your proposal?
So, Mr. Moderator, I actually would turn that over to Select Board because it would not be our purview.
Thank you.
And it's really their purview.
Ms. Collins, can you answer that question? Ms. Collins, are you there?
Mr. Moderator, may I just have one moment, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
By the way, the reason I'm not jumping ahead to other speakers is in case questions are for the select board who are would want to listen in carefully to those questions.
Mr. Moderator, would you please recognize Town Council Kevin Freitag?
Yes, Mr. Freitag, you're recognized.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Kevin.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and members of town meeting. Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council. I just wanted to point out that the article before you tonight does actually specify 3 addresses, 515 Canton Ave, 432 Adams Street, and 815 Blue Hill Avenue. And I point that out just to say, in response to some of the questions that were being asked about the locations specifically in East Milton, this article is quite specific, and it is for 432 Adams Street. So if there were other properties in East Milton Square or elsewhere in the town that might be appropriate, that would not fit under this article as it is drafted or as it is being proposed to town meeting this evening. So I just wanted to point that out so that we're all on the same page.
Do you have the answer to the question on the sale of potential sale of land in this article?
And was the question is if the property was sold, could the town use some of those funds to offset or pay back some of this debt?
In effect, it was
that-
what effect would a potential land sale have on this funding was the sense of the question.
So the response I think that I can give that's most precise is that if the property was sold, the town could at a future town meeting make a determination about how to appropriate those funds. And I don't see why they couldn't use it to offset or pay for some of the debt they incur in this process. It would be up to a future town meeting to make an appropriation to do so.
Mr. Walsh, you consider this. Could you weigh in on this question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I'd like to address Mr. Freitag's comments about the addresses were in the article. That is true. The addresses were put in that article as those were the 3 locations we were strongly considering submitting it. But as the moderator knows, and I believe Mr. Freitag, I think you'd agree, that the motion before the body is the recommendation of the warrant committee. And the recommendation of the warrant committee does not specifically include the address. We tried, for the benefit of the town meeting members, to have them understand that's our preferred location. It was in the article typing. And the discussion and negotiations over that are still ongoing with the select board. So I believe we're in a good position here that we're not asking for the funding as part of the recommendation of the warrant committee for those 3 specific locations. But I think Mr. Moderator would have Mr. Freitag address that.
Mr. Freitag? By the way, Mr. Freitag, we've had a point of order from Ms. Agostino. Ms. Agostino, you're recognized for the point of order.
Hi, Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. The first point of order is in agreement with Chair of the Building Committee, Brian Walsh, that the recommendation is what we're voting on. It does not specifically identify an address. And even if it did identify an address, considering, the time that everything takes to get moving, we do have a May town meeting and we usually have a fall town meeting. So I'm sure town council would agree that it's not identified in the recommendation, but a point of order being that we could always make a amended motion if anyone felt that it was specifically tied up. My second point of order regarding what town meeting member Mary Kelly pointed out, I believe she's absolutely correct that, and I was trying frantically to try to locate a previous article, but the language should also include, I think she said renovation, reconstruction. It should include and has always included, no matter what project we were working on, in the recommendation, that type of language. So those are the 2 point of orders that I think we need to get clear on this article.
Ms. Agostino, I need to ask you a favor. The point of orders interrupt the debate, and they're
Right.
usually about the proceedings, not about clarifying questions or asking follow-on clarification. I think I'd categorize your 2 points as requesting further clarification. So since you're jumping to the front of the line, perhaps we could stick to procedural topics rather than content topics, if you would. But Mr. Freitag,
Well, here's my continued question on that. Since town meeting member Mary Kelly brought it up, I think it's more of a point of order, not a discussion.
I disagree.
Okay. Well, keep it on your book then.
Thank you. Mr. Freitag, could you serve as the final word here?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. Again, Kevin Freitag, Office of Town Council. With regard to this question about the locations, I respectfully disagree with Mr. Walsh. There are three very specific locations that are identified in the article. The recommendation can be no broader than the notice that is provided to the members of town meeting than the article. So that recommendation can only therefore apply to those three properties that are specifically listed. That is not to say that a future town meeting couldn't come back with a follow-up article that might address this issue if the property at 432 was no longer part of the plan. But as for tonight, this article quite specifically asks for a specific amount of money for the construction and equipping of fire stations at these three specific locations. And to think that the recommendation could somehow broaden the scope to say other properties are also available for use of this funds, I think would be incorrect. I think that would be outside the scope of the article. And in terms of the language, I think that the words constructing and equipping are quite broad, such that they cover everything that is being proposed here. It sounds as though all the work that is being proposed at these locations is extensive and could be easily considered to be the construction of new fire stations, regardless of whether or not an exterior facade of a building might be maintained as part of the construction of the new fire station. So I think the language there is fine in terms of all the work that's being contemplated under the article and in the recommendation.
Yes, I've also had a couple days to think about this because in case this question came up, and I think I would agree with Mr. Freitag's interpretation. The two parts of this story are the article warns the town, so to speak, literally the term warrant, that they're going to be asking for a sum of money to build the headquarters and two substations, and they specifically put these. The Fire Station Building Committee, with support of the Select Board, put these addresses in, and then the warrant committee then in effect made a motion to go approve the article with some specific language that was no broader than those addresses. So, for example, a motion tonight to say, well, I want to move one of the firehouses would be out of order because the town wasn't warned about it. So I think the funding and the language of the locations fits together. And if there's some change in the future, then they'll the Fire Station Building Committee Select Board will have to come back to town meeting and pick a new address. But so we're looking at those two things together, in my view, tonight. Ms. Kelly, your hand is still up. Any follow-up, or does that satisfy?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just think in the article, at least using past history of this town meeting, having the words, in addition to the costs of constructing, having the words repair, renovation, remodeling, and demolition might behoove the article. That was the only point I was trying to make. If town council is confident that constructing and equipping covers everything else that's now in those very detailed budgets, then I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mr. Mullen, Ms. Freeman Hanna, and Mr. Morrissey. Mr. Mullen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Peter Mullen, Precinct 2. I notice in the scheme, the diagrams that were presented by the committee, that I believe there's an addition of at least one bay to central headquarters and one bay added to the Atherton Street Station. I'm wondering if there's any plans to add the ambulance service to the fire department and whether that's the reason for the additional bays.
Perhaps I'll ask two people to answer. Mr. Walsh, could you answer the reason for the bays and the select board to answer the question about the ambulance department?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, thank you. And I think I can help address one part of the question, but thank you, Mr. Mullen, for the question. The process that you follow, as you know, and we've pointed out quite clearly, 2 of our current fire stations were built more than 100 years ago. They were actually built to house horses. Over the period of time of 100 years, things have changed dramatically. We currently have a fire department that has a number of pieces of equipment that are not currently stored inside, like a 32-foot fire safety education trailer that's used to teach elementary school age children about fire safety at home, a 12-foot utility trailer, an F-250 vehicle used to supplement department operations and plows, in a fire, and actually a fire engine that's not stored inside. And so it's the operation of the fire department is always the purview of the fire chief in working under the direction of the town. But there are operational questions. We felt confident looking at all the equipment that they had and all the requirements, and gee, what challenges would they potentially have to add equipment in the future? We thought so. So we believe, and we did a lot of time with this, so we've landed on the correct number of bays. The number of bays are not reliant on the fire service taking on the ambulance service. But at this point, I think I'll stop there, and perhaps the select board would want to weigh in on that.
Ms. Collins, can you answer the question on ambulance service?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. There's no plan for our fire service to have ambulance service at this time. When the fire station building committee has come before the select board and discussed possible uses for bays, outside ambulance service is something that had been mentioned, but the select board hasn't taken a vote or anything like that. It's my understanding from the fire station building committee that the fire department has plenty of equipment, some of which is parked at the DPW because there isn't room either in the facilities or adjacent to the facilities in parking areas. They're stored at the DPW, and that they could then be brought on site. So I think as Mr. Walsh was saying, that's an operational decision by the fire department. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Mr. Mullen, your hand is still up. Any follow-up?
Mr. Moderator, one other question. I've been told that the address of 432 Adam Street, which is included in the article, is actually the address of the St. Agatha's Rectory, and it's not the lot that's being proposed for the East Milton Fire Station. I'm wondering if town council can say whether that would be a problem going forward.
Town council, can you consider the degree of specificity that Mr. Mullen is considering and the possible effect? Yes, thank you.
Good evening again, Kevin Freitag, the Office of Town Council. I am not aware of that information, the basis of the information upon which Mr. Mullins is basing his question, but I would say that the article is quite specific, and as I've said before, it does relate only to 432 Adams Street. So if there is a different property address that is actually at issue here, then it would seem to me that that would be outside of the scope of the article.
I want to make sure I understand, Mr. Freitag, just so I'm clear, since this is getting into a scope area. Are you saying if the address was wrong by a digit, or there was a subsection book or chapter, that's irrelevant?
If it's a different address, then it doesn't fall under this article. Again, the article is quite specific as the way that it's worded.
Okay.
Mr. Moderator, Dan Clark, if I may respond to the comment.
Yes, Mr. Clark.
So if you were to scroll up and look at the original portion of the article, the proposed subdivision that this half acre is located on the 432 Adams Street. Its parcel ID, if you scroll, I'm sorry, it was in the other, it was in Article 3, but if you were to look at Article 3, it identifies the parcel ID and the subsequent information from the assessor's map, and it is 432 Adams Street. There you go. So Town Treasurer's Map G, Lot 495, consisting of a half acre more or less for this specific municipal. So it is located at 432 Adams Street. It's a portion of land at 432 Adams Street.
That's very clear. Thank you. Let me get my participants back. Mr. Mullen, your hand's still up. Is that?
I wasn't able to follow that. I don't know where that is in Article 3 or the recommendation relating to Article. There is no recommendation in Article 3.
There is no recommendation. That's correct. It's in the article that was published. You can see the text there in the third line.
I agree, but that's in Article 3. That's not in Article 2.
Correct. My point is that there is no other address currently because that land has not been subdivided. So its current address is still 432 Adams Street.
I would defer to others on this. I just don't know.
Well, I think unless the select board has information to the contrary, it sounds like that the Fire Station Building Committee has answered that. Mr. Walsh, can you verify this has been double checked?
Yes, and Mr. Mullen, in order to guide the town to say where is the piece of land we intend to build, the address for where we intend to build is the only address is the address that we've publicized there. We put out an RFP. The parish of St. Agatha's responded to that, and we met with them, and they would subdivide a piece of 432 off for us to build on. If that agreement is finalized, the select board has already addressed the fact that they're still working on that. They'll come back in May. Then that subdivision would likely add a different address to that location where we put the pipe. Not likely it would, but right now that is the address that encompasses the land that we're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Clark. Ms. Friedman Hannah, you recognized?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Karen Friedman Hannah, Precinct 2. I too rise to state how much I appreciate the extra information that's been provided tonight and for all of the work done by this committee and town leaders. I would like to read a letter that was generated by several town meeting members from Precinct 2 about this, stating, "We, the undersigned, acknowledge the Milton Fire Department's dedication and service and our community's desire to build and renovate the town's fire stations. We also believe that consistent with 21st century modern fire stations and equipment is the commitment and action to have a Town of Milton employee workforce, including the Milton Fire Departments, that reflects Milton's racial, ethnic,
Thanks for warning me about this. It would have made me so nervous the way she opened.
We know that this can and must be prioritized. We look forward to working with town meeting members from all precincts and our town leaders to achieve this goal." And it's respectfully signed by myself, Karen Friedman Hannah, Ada Rosemarin, Kathy Fagan, Ellen Denoyer, Betty White, Deborah Savona, Rebecca Padera, Lori Stillman, and past Precinct 2 town meeting member Deborah Felton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, we'll recognize we have Mr. Morrissey, Mr. Collins, and Ms. Agostino. Mr. Morrissey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to go back to town council's opinion that the appropriation and the recommendation is earmarked and limited to 432 Adams Street. Do I have that correct?
Yes, among the other two addresses, yes.
So aren't we putting the cart before the horse? We were told at the beginning of the meeting that the selection of the 432 Adams Street was going to be deferred until the May meeting. But now there's an end run around that original motion, and you're appropriating sums for a site that hasn't been agreed to by the town meeting. I find that problematic. Unless you can amend the recommendation, I'd have to vote against it.
Understood.
I also think it's inconsistent with what was happened at the beginning of the meeting. I think a lot of people, it's 10:30. A lot of people have dropped off, assuming that the 432 Adams Street site wasn't a done deal, and that it would be, the community would have an opportunity to kick the tires and be heard and have a real day in court in May. So this is kind of a last minute bait and switch as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Do you have a question specifically? I guess now we can come back to Mr. Morris, see if he'd like to speak again. Mr. Collins, you're recognized. No, we cannot, Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, you're still muted. No, we'll come in and repair. We see you now, Mr. Collins.
All right, fine. I wanted to address the whole issue of the address of 432 Adams Street. It's been very accurately described by both Brian and Dan, but legally, from a real estate perspective, which is what I want to talk about, is that you cannot, the land hasn't been subdivided yet. As the key, these are the key words. When it is subdivided, then it is given an address. It's a postal address. As worded and as described, everything that you've seen here is absolutely accurate from a real estate perspective of how to identify property in terms of analysis. And so, just to close, I think that the decision to use the address of 432 Adams Street is absolutely the right one, because that's how it's done in the real estate business day in and day out before the land is physically subdivided. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Ms. Agostino, you're recognized. Actually, there's just a point I've got from this before Ms. Agostino. The select board was caucusing on one of those prior comments. Perhaps I'll recognize Ms. Collins and she can weigh in, and we'll get to Ms. Agostino.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Actually, that was a request for you to give the select board a few moments to caucus. We don't like to caucus while people are speaking because we miss important information. So if we could have a few moments, that would be appreciated.
Yes, please. We'll pause.
Thank you.
Folks, a question came in. I'll get my camera on in the chat while we're waiting. When the select board caucuses like this, are they subject to open meeting law? And actually, they're not. So when the select board, actually per the open meeting law, the select board may caucus like this in order to come back with an opinion, and they're doing so with the permission of the open meeting law. If you remember times when we would come to the high school, they would gather around the front table. Their words weren't, we weren't all privy to what they were saying. So this is really the same virtual equivalent to that. That's a good question. Thank you for asking. Ms. Collins, are you back?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that, Mr. Moderator. And thank you, town meeting, for your patience. Just while the select board checked in, it's important to us to be able to hear what everyone has to say. And so we do find it helpful to have you just suspend people's discussion for a moment. So thank you again.
So you have no reply at the moment. You just wanted the caucus and amongst yourselves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I see. All right. Thank you. Let's go back to our participants. By the way, if members are putting into the chat motions they'd like to make, if you could raise your hand and we'll address you in the sequence like we would at the high school, for example. So I think next up we had Ms. Agostino. You're recognized.
Hi, Mr. Moderator, Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. I wanted to circle back to the language that Mary Kelly had mentioned and that I had raised a point of order on. I just want to be 100% sure. The point of order I had raised is if we're using the CPA funding, that would not involve new construction. It actually would be preservation of the historic. And I understand 55% of that funding is going towards Atherton and 45 towards the town hall. So we do have some renovation work there. I mean, in all the years at town meeting, we've always included repair, renovate, remodeling where appropriate, demolish, and construction. So I just wanted on the record whether or not town council is saying that it's okay to use the CPA funding with this language, if there's some change in that type of language. So that was a point of order that I still would appreciate an answer on.
So I make sure I understand. You're asking if the town can use CPA funds without those specific words in the article and recommendation.
Correct, since the CPA fund language is, I just looked it up, preservation. It's not to build a new building, it's to preservation of historic resources, and we are using that money. So that's why I thought Mary's language was appropriate.
Okay. Let me also talk to town council for a moment. By the way, one member asked how long this meeting will go. Typically, when we're in the throes of an article, we try to finish it and not take on any new ones. So since this is the last article of the evening with the members' forbearance, I think we try to finish this. We only have 2 speakers after this. And I think we ought to be able to go to a vote. But let me just speak to town council for a minute. Thank you. Mr. Freitag, if you can join us again, you're recognized.
Yes, good evening again. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In response to the last question about the CPA funds, I think that the answer lies in the the recommendation, which actually does state about halfway down, after it says aggregating not more than $32,250,000 in principal amount pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 44, Section 7(1) of the Massachusetts General Laws as amended, or any other applicable law, and that the select board be authorized to accept grants or gifts from any other public or private funding source relating to this appropriation. So it seemed to me that there are other sources, and that would probably cover the CPA funds or use of the CPA funds as well. So I think that the language of the recommendation is broad enough to do that as it's currently written.
Thank you, Mr. Freitag. I have one last hand raised, which is Ms. Carr. Ms. Carr, you're recognized. Ms. Carr, if you could unmute. Ms. Carr has dropped her hand. I guess her question is answered. Okay, I see no other hands being raised, so we can move to the vote. This requires a 2/3 vote since it is a bonding issue. If we could put up okay, Mr. Morrissey, no one else wants to speak and you get to speak a second time. So yes, sir, you're recognized. Mr. Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to move to have this Article 3 considered in May. Or excuse me, this Article 2 considered in May.
So you'd like to specifically, you want to move to send this back to the Fire Station Building Committee that proposed it, and not, is that your specific motion?
Or the select board. I think this should be deferred to May, or it should be or it should be noticed out properly so that the appropriation isn't linked to a site that hasn't been approved. That's going to be discussed in May.
Okay, so Mr. Morrissey has moved that this article should be referred back to, since it was submitted by the Fire Station Building Committee per the warrant, to be referred back to the Fire Station Building Committee. Is there a second on this motion to refer? I'll look in the chat window. There's a second. We'll now move to debate the motion to refer. I see Mr. Walsh, you're recognized on the motion to refer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Moderator, I will have to caucus with our committee members and to reply with our response to that. And I assume that the technical motion is to send this back to the Fire Station Building Committee for further study.
That's correct. While you're caucusing, okay if we have some other members speak?
It is with me, Mr. Moderator.
Very good. Then Mr. Kiernan and Ms. Shea, you're recognized. Mr. Kiernan, can you unmute? Mr. Kiernan, your hand's up. I assume you want to speak. Okay, we'll come back. Then Ms. Shea, you're recognized. Ms. Shea, if you could unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
That's not Ellen Shea. I apologize.
Richard Shea, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9.
Thank you, sir.
As I see it now, you will be asking us to appropriate a sum of money for the building of a firehouse on a piece of land that we do not own as of the moment. And we have no right to be on it as of the moment. And I can understand why someone would want to put this off to May. I did understand Brian Walsh, I hope he's wrong, that they're negotiating with St. Agatha's because St. Agatha's doesn't own that land. I was a point man for the sale of the land for St. Elizabeth's across the street from the church. And I did not deal with St. Elizabeth's. I dealt with in town. And if you're not dealing with in town, you're not going to be able to buy that land. St. Agatha's doesn't own it. So the future, immediate future doesn't sound so great right now, but it's very hard to vote for something that we don't even own the piece of land that you want to put the building on. And so I think that's what you're going to ask us to do. And I will tell you, I oppose that.
Thank you, sir.
I'm on your call, Brian.
Apologies, folks. Mr. Kieran, your hand is still raised. Would you like to speak? There you are. Yes,
Yeah,
recognize
thank you
you.
very much, and my apologies for difficulty with Zoom.
Whatever.
John Kiernan, Precinct 6, and I would support the motion to defer this until the May meeting, and my reasons are twofold. First, a number of the citizens in Precinct 6 have indicated a desire to speak their minds about the location of it. And I think it's appropriate that this town meeting has agreed to defer that until May. And I think, secondly, it's appropriate to continue this article as well to that May discussion so that all things can be considered at the same time. And hopefully by that time, it will resolve the issues relating to the particular address. So that we can be assured that we are negotiating with the right people. And the other thing in response to something that Brian Walsh said, and I agree with him 100%, that now is a good time for bonding, and I don't expect the interest rates to go up between now and May. If there were a danger of that, then we could perhaps advance the next meeting. I think the printing cost of the article will be exactly the same. And I do not want to delay this, and I'm a tremendous supporter of the new buildings for the fire department. And I think we can move this along, but it should be done, I think, at the same time. That is the funding component and the site selection simultaneously. I just think it makes good common sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kieran. I see Mr. Walker, your hand is raised. You recognize, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I support Mr. Morrissey's motion to defer this. I believe the technical point that he's raised is correct. I agree with the previous speaker that since the Fed has said they don't plan to think about raising interest rates until 2023, we're probably safe to assume that between now and May, there's not going to be any increase in interest rates. And I'd also like the opportunity to have one more conversation with the select board. I don't believe Mr. Clark answered my question or addressed the concerns that I raised. So for all of those reasons, I support the motion to defer this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I see no other hands raised. There we go. Ms. Collins? You recognize, your hand's up. Ms. Collins, do you wish to speak? Then I'll recognize Mr. Asher.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. George Asher, Chair of Warrant Committee, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. Having heard the conversations and the very legitimate questions and concerns that the town meeting members have brought up, I would be amiss in my responsibilities and on behalf of the Warrant Committee, who has sat through, to my recollection, since I've been chair of these 4 years, 9 presentations by the Fire Station Building Committee, each one subject to questioning that has gone beyond the questions that have been raised today over a number of years. We are satisfied that the Fire Station Building Committee has exhausted virtually every site in town, has selected a location, which actually is 432 Adams Street. And we can quibble about that all we want, but why waste any more time on a fact that has already been established? And the idea of looking at further delay when that video showed truly I can't even describe how grody the conditions are for our fire station employees, our firefighters, in comparison to others that we have seen. We are being, I believe, perhaps overcautious in observing the details of approving something that absolutely has to be done. Yes, interest rates aren't going to advance immediately, but the idea that Brian Walsh and Dan Clark have forwarded, that regardless of the location of 432 Adams Street or on the site of the former East Milton Library, which has been deemed inappropriate, the cost of building will be very similar, if not identical, regardless of the location. To indicate that there's a bait and switch, which I think was a comment that I did hear, I don't believe does a service either to the warrant committee, whose responsibility it is to keep everybody in the process honest and to be the eyes and ears of the town meeting, which we have tried to do. So I am firmly in the belief, and I believe I have support from many members of the warrant committee, that to further delay this is not in anybody's interest. There will be details that will be outlined as we go forward. And there's a question of, can we get this done as a town? And I think we can. It's been outlined and detailed in exhaustive detail by the Fire Station Building Committee, and they have our confidence. And as the eyes and ears of the town meeting, I urge from the warrant committee, I urge the town meeting not to delay this vote, not to kick the can down the road any further, and to permit the process to continue so that we can have the firefighters getting the resources that they need to continue to provide services to this town in a safe and dignified fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Asher.
Mr. Moderator, Dan Clark, I don't have the ability to raise my hand, but I just wanted to add one comment from the Fire Station Building Committee.
Yes, Mr. Clark, you're recognized.
Thank you. And thank you for the kind words, Mr. Asher. I just wanted to add that it's not just delaying this to May town meeting. As I put in that one of those last slides, following a town meeting approval, we have to go out for a vote. We're trying to be prudent and take advantage of the annual town vote in April. So there is no other planned vote in the town after the April town vote. So it would either require a special town election, or we would have to wait until April of 22. So it's not as easy as moving it to May and we'll come back. And I think the comments that Mr. Asher mentioned hit the nail on the head, which is we know what the cost of this East Milton station is going to be. And if needed, we can come back and amend the address from the Fire Station Building Committee standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands raised on the motion to refer, so we'll go to the Mr. Walsh as the chair. What is the opinion of the Fire Station Building Committee as a submitting authority? Then we'll go to the warrant committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yeah, Brian Walsh, Chair of the Fire Station Building Committee. I have caucused with our committee members, and they are in agreement that we keep moving ahead. And I just would want to second Mr. Clark's comments. We will come back if that address isn't right, and we will address that with town meeting. There's so many things that we're trying to get. We might lose a whole year, and we could start putting this out to bid to get a good bid and start some work on this. And if we have to wait another whole year, I do believe the interest rates will be higher. I do believe the bids will be higher, and I do believe we'll have less options. So I would implore, I used this before to trust us. We've got a tremendous amount of talent here. We are not trying to pull a fast one. We had hoped that the negotiations the select board is so diligently working on would have been completed by tonight. My expectation is they will have it by May. We'll know either way, and we will address it in May. But please support us and let us get this going, as Mr. Asher has so eloquently stated.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Asher, what's the opinion of the warrant committee on the motion to refer?
We'll. Oh, sorry. I have to unmute. I have two. I apologize. I have two things going at the same time. We'll take the poll of the committee and refer to you immediately.
Thank you. Ms. Kinsella, your hand is raised. Would you like to speak to the motion to refer? Ms. Kinsella, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to say, as the Public Health Director, I have been into the fire station behind Town Hall to do blood pressure checks. And when I was in there doing blood pressure checks, the smell of urine from mice was disgusting. And really, you know what? We can do better. The fire department deserves better, the men and women that serve us in the town. And I urge a vote tonight for the new fire stations, because really they're in deplorable condition and they deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I see Mr. Rodensky. You're recognized.
Yes, Don Rodensky, Precinct 6. The general consensus I'm hearing from everybody on this call is that we need the new fire stations. I think everyone can agree on that. The big problem we seem to be having right now is the issue of the address showing up of 432 Adams Street. Can that be stricken from the article and we vote on it without an address? Would that maybe solve some of the problems we're having here tonight?
In my consultation with town council, we think not, because the recommendation before the body says they're going to build a headquarters and 2 substations, and you'd have the headquarters and 1 substation specific, and the 3rd substation would be floating, so to speak, and the town wouldn't know where that substation was intended to land, as it were. So our belief is the language of the article and the recommendation together kind of form a whole of how the town was warned what the $32 million would be spent on.
Okay.
If I could just pause for a moment, I just need to consult with town council for a few minutes. Thank you. Mr. Rudinsky, I consulted with town council and just a clarification on it. Since the town was warned that they were going to get 3 fire stations at these addresses for $32 million, in a sense, I stand by the point that you could not leave the recommendation saying you're going to build a headquarters and 2 substations and then say you're going to, but not at 432 Adams Street, because you've kind of warned the town. So then someone might be thinking, well, I may not be getting 3 substations, sorry, a headquarters and 2 substations. Theoretically, someone could say, you'd be reducing scope. I want a headquarters and 1 substation, and I'm going to reduce the amount of money accordingly. That would be an example of an amendment that's within scope, because you're narrowing the scope down without changing fundamentally what the town thought it was going to get. But I just reconfirm to leave the recommendation as it stands as 32 million, headquarters, 2 substations, and at the addresses that the town was warned at, then I think you can't just strike the 432 Adams and leave the headquarters and 2 substations.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes,
Mr. Moderator.
can we hang on, Mr. Asher? I have one more
yes, of
comment
course.
from Ms.
Oh,
Agostino.
I'm sorry, because we have a vote for you.
Okay. Ms. Agostino, since no one else has raised, you can come a second time. You're recognized. If you
Mr. Moderator, yep, Mr. Moderator, Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. I just want to bring us back to where we started. This has been overdue for 30 years. What our health inspector mentioned doesn't even begin to cover the illnesses that our firefighters have suffered due to the mold in the building. I want to urge, while I asked for a unanimous vote on this, I am praying that we do pass this 2/3 vote tonight. And if anyone is concerned about the address, I went to the assessor's website, and the building to the left of the rectory, the big commercial office building, is 424. And then the rectory and that area where the fire station would be is 432. And the church is 440. So maybe it's divine intervention that the numbers would go in the correct order and the firehouse may actually be at 432. And this building committee has done, as everyone has mentioned, an inordinate amount of work. I'm sure I said that word wrong. And they need our support so that we don't have to have a special town meeting to pass this vote to the residents. And if anything did change, amendments can always be made in the future. So I implore you to give our public safety the vote they need tonight and give them the 2/3 vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Walker, your second bite at the apple, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, town meeting member, precinct 10. Actually, my question is just a point of order. Does the motion to defer this require 2/3 vote or a majority vote?
Majority vote.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. With that, Mr. Asher of the Warrant Committee.
Mr. Moderator, George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, town meeting member, Precinct 6. Unanimously and emphatically, the Warrant Committee rejects the motion.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, with that, we'll move to a vote on the motion to refer this back to the Fire Station Building Committee for further study. Can we put up the polling question? All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, vote no. All abstaining, vote abstain. Could we open up the phones if there's any left? On the phones, all in favor of the motion to refer, please signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. Thank you. We can close the phones. Give it a few more seconds. And we can close the poll. The motion to refer fails, 78% no, 21% yes, and 1% abstain. With that, we'll return back to the article before the body. At this point, are there any further speakers. I see no hands raised on the article before the body. This requires a 2/3 vote. Could we put the poll up, please? All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, vote no. All abstaining, vote abstain, please. And if we could open up the phones. On the phones, all in
Yes.
favor? Yes, yes. Any opposed on the phones? Thank you. We can close the phones. And we can close the poll. Thank you. I see the article passes 87% yes, which is greater than the 2/3, 12% no, and 1% abstain. So with that, that concludes town meeting's business tonight. Could I have see in the chat or the Q&A window a motion to adjourn? So moved. Is there a second? There's been a second by Mr. Lessing. If we could put up the poll question, motion to adjourn. All in favor of the motion to adjourn before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And on the phones? Supporting the motion to adjourn on the phone, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Aye.
Thank you. We can close the phones and we can close the poll. It passes 97%. We are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying very late and all your thorough preparation. We are adjourned.